The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Medea Benjamin's new book, Kingdom of the Unjust, Behind the U.S.-Saudi Connection. And this is from the introduction. Through the women-led peace organization Code Pink, which I co-founded with Jody Evans after the 9/11 attacks, I have spent much of the last decade standing up against the U.S. military intervention in the Middle East and supporting local democracy activists. I traveled many times to the region, listening to human rights activists, marching with them in the streets, dodging tear gas and bullets, and getting beaten up and deported by government thugs. I have seen firsthand the deadly effects of U.S. foreign policies. The 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq destroyed the lives of millions, including many of my dear friends, and unleashed the sectarian hatred that later gave birth to the Islamic State. I recall a conversation with my Iraqi colleague Yanar Mohammed, daughter of a Shiite father and a Sunni mother, and founder of the Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq. When I asked her what was the most notable legacy of the U.S. invasion of her country, she gave the chilling response: we, Sunnis and Shia, learned to hate each other. In another part of the Middle East, U.S. military support for Israel has wreaked havoc on the lives of Palestinians and aroused the ire of people throughout the region. Continuous U.S. military interventions, from drone warfare in Yemen to overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi in Libya to funneling an endless stream of weapons into the region, have unleashed new levels of violence. But the United States is not the only nation whose massive footprint has been trampling on the lives of people in the Middle East. The other nation is Saudi Arabia, an oppressive monarchy that denies human rights to its own people and exports extremism around the world. It also happens to be the closest U.S. ally in the Arab world. During the 1980s and 1990s, I met intolerant and violent young men in Pakistan and Afghanistan who were trained to hate Westerners in Saudi schools. In 2001, I saw my own nation convulsed by an attack on September 11th that was perpetrated mostly by Saudis. Not hard to connect the dots behind the spread of the Saudi intolerant ideology of Wahhabism, the creation of al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, and the attacks in New York, Paris, Brussels, and San Bernardino. You can also connect the dots between Saudi Arabia and the failure of some of the historic uprisings associated with the Arab Spring, since the Saudi monarchy did not want calls for democracy to threaten its own grip on power. I was in Bahrain after Saudi tanks crushed the inspiring grassroots encampment in Pearl Square, where tens of thousands had gathered day after day to demand democracy. I will never forget the excitement of being in Tahrir Square during the Egyptian Revolution, and watching aghast as a military coup backed by the Saudis put some 40,000 activists behind bars. In Yemen, the Saudis took a direct military role in that nation's internal conflict with a ruthless bombing campaign. When I travel overseas, people often ask me why Saudi Arabia, a country that is so repressive internally and overseas, is such a close ally to the United States. Iranian friends want to know why the U.S. government is so outspoken about human rights violations in Iran, but silent about the worst abuses in the Saudi kingdom. Yemenis want to ask why my government supplies weapons to the very nation, Saudi Arabia, that bombed their schools and hospitals. Saudi women ask why the United States, which professes great democratic values, props up a regime that treats women as second-class citizens. The easy answer is oil, weapon sales, and other business interests. Oil has formed the basis for U.S.-Saudi ties. The kingdom has become the largest purchaser of American weapons in the world, and hundreds of billions of Saudi petrodollars help shore up the U.S. economy. But there's another reason, perhaps more critical than any of the others. The American people have not demanded an end to this dysfunctional, toxic relationship. Why? In part because the American people know so little about it. Even Americans who consider them parts of a peace movement know virtually nothing about the kingdom. The Saudi press is muzzled, foreign journalists are strictly monitored, and only tourists visiting for religious purposes are allowed into the country. Add to that a Saudi lobby that lines the pockets of U.S. think tanks, such as the Middle East Institute, Ivy League universities, such as Harvard and Yale, and influential institutions from the Clinton Foundation to the Carter Center. This checkbook diplomacy helps put a happy face on the abusive monarchy and silences its critics. So we have a lot to uncover. This book is meant to be a primer, giving readers a basic understanding of how the kingdom holds on to power internally and tries to influence the outside world. It looks at the founding of the Saudi state, the treatment of dissidents, religious minorities, women, and migrant workers, the spread of Wahhabism, the kingdom's relationship with the West, and its role in the region, and what the future might hold. As we delve into the inner workings of this dystopian regime, don't mistake criticism of Saudi Arabia for Islamophobia. This book is not a critique of Islam, but a critique of three intertwining factors that have shaped the Saudi nation: the extremist interpretation of Sunni Islam, known as Wahhabism, the appropriation of the Saudi state by one family, and Western support for this dynasty. Criticizing Saudi Arabia should not be equated with support for Saudi's nemesis, Iran. The Iranian government is guilty of some of the same abuses as the Saudis. Book Kingdom of the Unjust.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. It's Friday. And so how about Middays with Mark? Congressman Mark Pocan on for the hour, taking your calls. Brilliantly representing the 2nd District of Wisconsin. He's also the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. You can find his website, Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep, R-E-P, Mark Pocan, M-A-R-K, Pocan, P-O-C-A-N. Congressman, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here. Quite a week.
Indeed. And I don't know if you caught the news. I mean, literally broke in the last 4 minutes. Sean Spicer just resigned in protest over the appointment of Anthony Scaramucci as the White House Communications Director.
I think there are a lot of people at Saturday Night Live right now who are very, very sad.
Yeah, Melissa McCarthy just lost a gig. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very strange. It's very, very strange. So, I saw this story yesterday. The first one I saw was on Huffington Post about how it was an analysis of the New York Times interview and how Trump said, well, you pay $12 a year for insurance starting when you get right out of college. And you pay that $12 a year until you're 70, and by then you actually have some insurance. And I thought, that's weird. And then it turns out that back in May, in an interview with The Economist, he said the exact same thing, except it was $15 a month rather than $12 a year. What the heck is going on? Does this guy, not understand the difference between the term life insurance he sees advertised on Fox News and how health insurance works? And is this a problem that goes beyond the president? Does the entire Republican caucus not understand how health insurance works?
Well, Tom, I'll tell you, you got to remember, and I'm not saying that if you're a wealthy person you can't relate to other people, but, over half of Congress are millionaires. Look at Darrell Issa and some of these other folks who are multi.
Oh, he's worth like $900 million, I think.
Yeah, and so to them, 12, 15, 1,000, it's all kind of the same, right? It just doesn't. It's not a lot of money, and to those of the rest of us, we were kind of shocked to see that. I mean, that interview in and of itself, I had retweeted something. I'm forgetting the exact words they used, but basically, they were comparing it to someone who just took a hit of acid as he gave the interview because he rambled in so many different areas, and it was such a bizarre interview. But to show that disconnect as they are taking away health care from, under one of the most recent proposals, now 32 million people in this country. They just don't get it. They really don't get what real people care about, which is why, when I look at my neighboring district, Paul Ryan's district, he's gone very Washington clearly these days as speaker. You got a guy like Randy Bryce who is an iron worker who's running, and he can talk about stuff. He said, let's trade jobs. I mean, let's make people understand what you actually pay out of your copay and what the actual insurance costs per month. Let's make them understand the basic economics of what people talk about at their kitchen table. Can you afford your mortgage? Can you have health insurance for your family? Can you send your kids to college if they want to go? And can you take a family vacation? That's what real people think about, not what people like Donald Trump and I think the Republican majority thinks about.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. And in fact, Paul Ryan, you mentioned Paul Ryan, sometime in the recent past, I don't have the article in front of me here. I was riffing off it yesterday. But sometime in the recent past, Paul Ryan made the comment that, you can't have a sustainable system where healthy young people are paying for sicker old people. And I thought that was the whole point of health insurance. We pay into it our whole lives, and so that when we need it, it's there.
But you got to remember, Tom, when I first was running for Congress, this is now going back about 5 years, maybe 5.5, it was the same week that he was seen out having two $350 bottles of wine with a couple lobbyists for dinner. And so
I remember that.
Yeah, remember that? That was the week I happened to be out there when I was running. When people can drink multiple bottles of $350 bottle of wine, you aren't in touch anymore with real people.
Yeah. Well, and that was as I recall, dinner with a couple of lobbyists at a fancy schmancy restaurant here in Washington, D.C. So, okay, so there's that and this whole healthcare thing. We're talking, by the way, with Congressman Mark Pocan today. It's Middays with Mark. He will be taking your calls as soon as I'm done interrogating him. If you'd like to ask a question of Congressman Pocan, give us a call. Give him a call at 202-808-9925. Your opportunity to talk to a member of Congress, and one of the very best. Congressman Jeff Sessions has instructed the nation's police to ramp back up civil asset forfeiture, at least the federal agencies, after President Obama put a stop to it. In 2015, the federal authorities in the United States seized over $3.2 billion worth of cash and assets from Americans who were never convicted of crimes, and that amount is more than all the burglars in the country stole that year. This is mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, and the way they did a lot of this was to get around state laws that actually were stricter, so they could bump things to federal court, so they could actually take some of the things that they took from people, again, without any conviction. So the fact that Jeff Sessions and this Department of Justice is overturning the changes that were made by the Obama administration to get rid of that is pretty amazing. Even more amazing, I think, is the fact that, the president talked about saying he never would have made Jeff Sessions the AG if he knew he was going to recuse himself on Russia, right? So the Department of Justice was big in the news also this week on multiple fronts that, again, just show that complete disconnect with reality that this White House has.
Yeah, it's really, really extraordinary. And the whole civil asset forfeiture thing, it's so wrong. I don't know how we got on that road, where it started, or I think it came along with Nixon's war on drugs. But boy, what a non, small d democracy, democratic thing. Anyhow,
not something you expect of America.
Indeed. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us, Middays with Mark, here on the Thom Hartmann Program, and he is taking your call right after this break. Congressman Pocan represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. He's also the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And his website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark, M-A-R-K, Pocan, P-O-C-A. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Your calls for Congressman Pocan coming up right after this. Welcome back. George in Santee, California, watching us on Free Speech TV. George, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Tom, and good day to you and Congressman Pocan. Mr. Pocan, I would like to know your position on our foreign policy in the Middle East.
Sure, George. It's a little broad. There's a lot of things there. I think in general, let me say this, and I think this is probably true of many of us in the Progressive Caucus, George. We would like to see a bit more of a scaled back Defense Department where we're not taking the lead in every single action wherever it is on the globe, especially in the Middle East. It seems that we, from our past experiences there, we don't know the region nearly as well as people in the region do. And while I think when there is a need for us to be involved, we can provide essential backup to people in the region. I think our past experience of trying to lead in this area has not proven wise, whether it be Iraq or Afghanistan. Clearly a lot of the efforts in Syria have not gone well, and it's a huge amount of cost, both in human terms and dollars. So, I wish we had a bit more of a focus on diplomacy across the board, even with some people that maybe haven't always been our diplomatic partners, before we just automatically jump to defense methods. And if you look at this current budget and the appropriations bills that we just passed in the last couple of weeks, and it'll be on the floor in the House next week, there's a huge increase going into defense, and it's not that it's going to the people who actually serve us in the military. It's often going to military contractors and a lot of things I think are just going to cost us far more down the road.
Okay. Dion in Round Lake, Illinois. Dion, you're on the watch this on YouTube. Dion, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, Trump had a luncheon with Republicans, I believe, on Wednesday, and he said that President Obama lied 20 times about Obamacare. But he's saying that if we go to single payer, like the Democrats want, we will go bankrupt. Is that true? And how did we go to single payer without going bankrupt? And do you think this is another lie of Trump?
Yeah, I think I heard last night, and I'm not sure if I haven't fact-checked this myself, but I heard in the first 6 months he's been president, not only have we done virtually nothing in Congress, he's made statements that he signed more bills than any president, and he's down the list quite a bit. What I heard is he did 991 tweets. And most of those fall probably in the either odd information or misinformation categories more than often. When he says things about like that about single payer, or anyone says that, they're just wrong. I mean, Canada, Europe, you can look across the globe and see where this works extremely well. The problem is you're going to disrupt a very big, significant, one out of every $6 in the economy when you talk about healthcare. And if you actually talk about a big concept like Medicare for all, single payer, a lot of people get their backs riled, and I think that's why you see people either slow to sometimes come on board, even though I think it makes complete logical sense to go that path, or you'll see a lot of resistance because they're supporting the special interests, whether it be the insurance companies or others, rather than supporting the American people. So outright lie. Many articles are out there showing just the opposite. I think that's our aspirational place to get to. But right now what we're saying is let's just fix the Affordable Care Act. 20 million people now have access to health insurance who didn't before. Things like pre-existing conditions, now you can get coverage. You don't have a lifetime cap. Women are paying the same as men. Let's keep all that good stuff, and let's just fix the areas that need to be fixed. And let's do something about health care and not about tax breaks for the wealthy.
Well said.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Congressman Mark Pocan on the line with us, taking your calls for the hour. And Ayat in Cleveland, Ohio. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good afternoon, Tom. I would like to ask the congressman about this bipartisan bill that is going through, trying to pass through the Congress and the Senate, trying to criminalize people that are involved with the DPS. And I mean, they said it's up to $1 million fine and 20 years in prison.
Right. Are you familiar with this, Congressman?
Yeah, there was just an article that sparked this week. I haven't seen it moving unless, again, this week I spent hours and hours and hours till midnight several nights doing markup for appropriations. But this is the bill trying to ban any attempts at doing the BDS movement, dealing with obviously Palestine and Israel. And I don't know if it's something that they're going to push next week. We have been told in the House there could be some sanction bills that may come up. This was not on the list that I saw. I think I saw something in the article this week. The Senate might have had either I don't know if a committee took it up or it was just an article about it. But I don't know, Ayat, that there's movement on the bill at this time. But I did see an article popped up this week, and I'm sorry I can't tell you more about what that article was. I just remember seeing it during the week.
Yeah, what I've read about it, and we discussed this some yesterday, is that apparently under this legislation, and I may be wrong on this, but this is what I've read in the press, because I haven't read the bill itself, which is very often almost impossible to do anyway. But even under this legislation, from what I've read in the press, even arguing in a public forum in favor of the divestiture and the boycotting of Israel over Gaza and Palestine and whatnot, just simply advocating it, speaking out, could subject a person to 20 years in prison and $1 million in fines. And there's a bunch of good Democrats who are co-sponsors of this. I'm guessing that somehow this thing got dropped into a bunch of members of Congress's laps, from a friendly pro-Israel source, and they just figured, it's some kind of nice pro-Israel thing. Yeah, throw my name on it. And they didn't realize what it is, and this blowback is just going to freak everybody out. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll tell you, this is one of those issues, Tom. I've been taking a lot of heat lately from some of the extreme right so-called pro-Israel groups who have really a very, very political agenda, because I've sponsored things like working with the Quakers when they wanted a meeting room to talk about the plight of Palestinian youth. I've been to the region as recent as a year ago, and I can tell you we need to have peace in that region, but you need to have the conversations that have to go on. And when you continue to expand settlements illegally, that runs against everything. When I was there several years ago, we had just started the peace process again. It makes it harder to get to that place. And, I think a lot of the rhetoric that's out there, when I talk to the average Israeli or the average Palestinian, they don't abide by that rhetoric. It's kind of the government leaders like Netanyahu and some very, very partisan folks who fall in that extremist trap. Real people on the ground just want to see peace in the region, but we've got to get those conversations restarted. You can't continue to expand settlements. They've had some pretty serious prosecutorial actions against some players in Palestine that have violated, many of us think, civil rights, and we're just concerned that the efforts going on right now aren't leading to a peaceful solution. And I would argue, from my conversations there, if you want to fight ISIS, one of the best things we could possibly do to defeat ISIS is have a peaceful two-state settlement in the region, because if you do that, you take away one of the major talking points that ISIS uses to recruit people. So, it's a very tough area. People get very hyper-political. Just like I said, just working with the Quakers alone got me attacked and called anti-Semitic and everything else in the world. It's a tough region, and people politically get very afraid because people try to scare you, and it's a tough area for people to really stand up and say, look, no one's completely right on this, but we've got to get conversations that get us to a peaceful negotiation.
Amen. And it's the best thing for Israel's security, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we all have said what we want is a two-state solution with the appropriate land swaps, right? I mean, that's kind of from both the Palestinian side and the Israeli side. The problem is the actions going on now are going to make it harder and harder every single day to get that done. And that's why we've got to stop any actions that make it harder to get done. But let's get back to that point where we can have that true peace. And if you do that, you will have done more to defeat ISIS than dropping the mother of all bombs or anything else that we do.
Right. Amen. Paul, in Round Mountain, California, you are on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. I just was reading these articles about the Democratic, the DCCC.
Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee.
Right. Recruiting Blue Dog Democrats to recruit candidates for the 2018 election. These are people that are fiscally conservative. I think, and I just wondered what Mr. Pocan's reaction is to this.
Sure. Paul, and thanks for asking that, because I think, at first when I saw the article, or the headline, I should say, I reacted. I'm like, what? What's going on? This is crazy because, those are the more extreme elements of the Democratic Party, but that certainly doesn't inspire the base. It certainly doesn't get people who don't traditionally vote out to vote. And when I read it more and looked into it a little more, I think, honestly, this was more of an effort by the Blue Dogs to gain a little bit of muscle and show that they're doing something to try to help win back seats than anything that the DCCC is doing in an organized way, because I can also tell you the DCCC is organizing a lot of good progressives to run in some of these seats. And, when you look at someone, again, like a Randy Bryce in running against Speaker Ryan, you've got someone that the Congressional Progressive Caucus just made its first endorsement this week of, and yet they're also working very closely with the DCCC. So I think the misleading part is that I think the Blue Dogs wanted to get a little press to say, hey, look, we've got some muscle. We're not just in the teens of members versus the mid-70s that the Progressive Caucus has. And it's not so much about a reality of a shift in policy at the DCCC.
Yeah. Congressman, we just have 1 minute until we're going to hit the hard break at the bottom of the hour here. Not enough time to put a caller on. What are your thoughts on how the Democratic Party is strategizing going forward, and any advice and suggestions for our listeners about how they might participate and interact, things like that?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that my good friend Keith Ellison is now the deputy chair of the party, and I think if people take and listen to what Keith is saying, which is building the party through the grassroots and, focusing more on getting people out to vote than just buying more ads on TV that consultants make a commission on, the better off we're going to be. But it really has to involve a lot of conversations now, not just at election time. And people can join their local Democratic parties, and if they don't like the direction they're going, they can run for leadership and take over those parties. So I think if we really focus on a grassroots party from the bottom up, which I think is what I see happening, because Tom Perez also is someone who it was one of the more progressive secretaries under Barack Obama. We just have to make sure the party actually executes that and doesn't get sidetracked from people who may be in their finance divisions, and realize that the grassroots power is what financed Bernie Sanders' campaign. There is power to supporting that grassroots efforts, and that's how we win elections.
Amen. And Tom Perez was in the studio yesterday talking with us. It's
awesome.
Seems like a good start, right? Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Middays with Mark. Your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. And welcome to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016. This is one of the very last chapters is titled Green Revolution. Just as America now faces an unsustainable thirst for energy, so too was Germany faced with a power crisis in the late 1990s. Growing demands for electricity collided with the reality that the country has no oil reserves and a strong bias among its people against building nuclear power plants in the wake of the nearby Chernobyl meltdown. Yet the government knew that the country needed the electricity, equivalent of at least 1 or 2 new nuclear power plants over the next decade. So how to generate that much electricity without nuclear power? In 1999, progressives in Germany passed the 100,000 Roofs program,
which mandated the banks had to provide low-interest 10-year loans to homeowners sufficient for them to put solar panels on their roofs. They then passed the Renewable Energy Law and integrated the 100,000 Roofs program into it in 2004. The Renewable Energy Law, REL, mandated that for the next 10 years, the power company had to buy power back from those homeowners at a level substantially above the going rate, so that the homeowners' income from the solar panels would equal their loan payments on the panels and would also represent the actual cost to the power company to generate that amount of power by building a new nuclear power plant. At the end of the 10 years, the power company gets to buy solar power at its regular rate, and it now has a new source of power without having to pay and maintain and eventually dismantle a nuclear reactor. In fact, while the reactor would have a 20 to 30-year lifespan, the solar panels typically last 50 years. For the homeowners, it was a no-brainer. They were getting low-interest loans from banks for the solar panels, and the power companies were paying for the power generated from those panels at a higher rate, high enough to pay off the loans. It was like getting solar power panels for free. If anything, the government underestimated how rapidly Germans would embrace the program, and thus how quickly power would be produced by the program. By 2007, Germany accounted for about half the entire world's solar market. Just that one year, 2007, saw 1,300 megawatts, and a megawatt is 1,000,000 watts, 1,300 megawatts of solar generating capacity brought online just across Germany. For comparison, consider the average generating capacity of each of the last 5 nuclear power plants brought online in the United States. That capacity is 1,100 megawatts. So Germany had 1,300 megawatts just in 2007 added. In 2008, Germany added 2,000 megawatts of solar power to their grid, like 2 nukes. And in 2009, homeowners and businesses put onto their roofs enough solar panels to glean an additional 2,500 megawatts. Although the goal for the first decade of this century was to generate around 3,000 megawatts, eliminating the need to build 2 new nuclear power plants, the simple no-risk program had instead added over 8,000 megawatts of power, roughly 8 nuclear power plants. And because the generation sources were scattered across the country, there was no need to run new high-tension power lines from central generating stations, making it more efficient and less expensive. Meanwhile, as dozens of German companies got into the business of manufacturing and installing solar power systems, the cost dropped by more than half between 1997 and 2007 and continues to plummet. The Germans expect that by 2050, more than a quarter of all their electricity will come from solar. It's now just over 1%. Now, I wrote this book 2.5 years ago. Germany this summer produced 100% of their electricity this way. That's how rapidly this has changed just in the last 3 years. It's really remarkable. Adding to the roughly 12.5% of all German energy currently produced by renewable sources, mostly hydro, but also wind, biomass, and geothermal. The solar panel program has been so successful that the German government is now thinking that it's time to back off and leave this to the marketplace, which they've largely done. And it's not just leaving it to the marketplace. They had to reinvent their grid. There's to be a smart grid to handle all the added electricity that all these solar panels were producing. They have too much electricity now in Germany. Germany is now considering incentives to its world-famous domestic auto industry to manufacture flex-fuel plug-in hybrid automobiles that can get over 500 miles per gallon of strategic gasoline, boosted by domestically produced rooftop solar with existing technology. Meanwhile, Denmark has invested billions in having more than half of its entire auto fleet using only electricity by 2030. And China is no slouch when it comes to renewable energy. Although the Chinese continue to bring another dirty coal-fired power plant online about once a week, they surpassed every other nation in the world in 2010 in direct investment in the production of solar and wind power. As the Los Angeles Times reported in March of 2010, U.S. clean energy investments hit $18 billion last year. A report from the Pew Charitable Trust said a little more than half the Chinese total of $34 billion. 5 years ago, Chinese investments in clean energy totaled just $2.5 billion. The United States also slipped behind 10 other countries, including Canada and Mexico, in clean energy investments as a share of the national economy. The Pew report pointed to another factor constraining U.S. competitiveness, a lack of national mandates for renewable energy production or a surcharge on greenhouse gas emissions that would make fossil fuels more expensive. The ultimate power to the people is for homes to have their own solar roofs, no longer needing power lines from distant power plants owned by big transnational corporations. And a few countries are pushing this solar tipping point, like China and Germany.
Book, The Crash of 2016.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and it's our Middays with Mark show. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. Congressman, you're back with us?
I am.
Okay, great. Bill in Campwood, Texas. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, this is Bill in Campwood. Thanks for what for all that y'all do. My complaint is that the DNC just doesn't do enough. Now, I know you might not be able to control that, but I believe they should, every time anybody mentions health care, it should be Medicare for all, and they should pound that, over and over again until it gets through. And you don't see him on TV much. A little bit. Tom had him on the other day, but Tom Perez I've seen occasionally on, but not very often. He needs to go out and get arrested if necessary to get attention. We got to do something, because if we don't, they're going to keep the Senate and the House, I believe.
Congressman?
Yeah, I hear you, Bill. Thanks for your comments. So let me just say this. I think sometimes it's tough for the Democratic National Committee because they don't actually run campaigns. You have the Congressional Campaign Committee for Democrats, you have the Senatorial Committee, you have the individual campaigns themselves, you have the 527 groups. The party, really, their job is, in my opinion, more to provide the overall infrastructure to be in place and to have some of those broader general themes like you mentioned. But, they often get blamed for individual elections when, quite honestly, DNC is one of the last entities that actually is involved with each individual election. Now, having said that, I think, what you bring up about taking those big themes and getting out there and showing what Democrats in a big theme are, they can do that now throughout the time going up to the election, and then individual elections will take on their particular issues. But those top issues that, health care should be considered a right and everyone needs to have access to affordable health insurance, they should be very, very strong on. And I think they're trying that. It's just, as the DNC, sometimes, that's not where the media goes to first for comment. Now, on Medicare for All, if I can just add this, Tom, I think we need to know, I think we're up to now 115 people in the House who are supporting the Medicare for All bill that John Conyers has. It's an all-time high, and it's still increasing every week, and that's because people are out reaching out to their members of Congress and asking them to sign on to the bill, and Bernie Sanders has a similar bill in the Senate. So, I think for people who really care about this as we have this debate on health care, we need to make sure that we're actively calling our members of Congress and asking them to sponsor the bill, because if we can keep this momentum up, it will be a natural part of the conversation on health care, but we've got to keep that pressure up.
Charles in Southgate, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, Congressman Pocan, good morning.
Good morning, Charles.
I wanted to ask you about it's about renewable energy, and I've been hearing about this bill 987, the 5100 plan, and despite political obstacles, what are the possibilities of that becoming reality?
Yeah, well, I think you can't say despite political obstacles, right? Because the reality is, right now the House of Representatives is run by this guy named Paul Ryan, the Senate's run by this guy named Mitch McConnell, and the White House has this occupant, former reality show star Donald Trump. Given all of that, we're going to have an uphill battle on many things when it comes to the environment. We just went through a budget and appropriations process where the Environmental Protection Agency was dinged extremely heavily financially and is not going to be able to do a lot of the work that they did under the Obama administration. So I think we need our aspirational goals, and we need to make the points of why things like solar. I just put 8.5 kilowatts in our house last October. I love paying between $13 and $20 a month for my utility bill. Why all of those things make sense and why those things often create jobs here in the U.S. As opposed to sending all of our money overseas with things like oil. And I think we need to make all those cases, but pragmatically, politically, because that was your question, this is going to be a difficult time to see that happen, but doesn't mean you don't stop working on what you want to get to, and you need to make the case so that we can grow that. And then again, in 18, if people who won't change their ways, you can change their faces, those who represent you. But realistically, we right now are doing our best to stop deep cuts to environmental protection agencies in Congress.
Tom in Portland, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Congressman, this is Tom. I just wondered if you could address the SHIELD Act, which would harden our grid. I know it seems to be stalled, and I haven't heard much about it recently, and I'd just like to hear what your thoughts on it. Thank you.
Yeah, Tom, I'll be honest. I don't know a lot about it. I've been this week literally immersed till midnight and 11 p.m. several days, all-day markups on appropriations. I don't know the status of it, and I just don't want to try to wing it because I don't have that information. I'm sorry.
Okay. Michael in Imperial Beach, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, Tom and Representative Pocan. Okay, Representative Pocan, I wanted to know who is in control of our Middle East policy, because what the news is Trump sent Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, who inherited his father's real estate business when his father went to federal prison. Is Jared Kushner actually in control of our Middle East policy? Thank you, sir.
Michael, great question. Questions that we ask on a regular basis. You would hope that it would be the professionals, right, within the Department of Defense and within intelligence and others who are helping provide that guidance. It does appear that the leading qualification to this White House is that you're the son-in-law of the president. Therefore, you're an expert on all things, including Middle East policy. So that should worry all of us. The fact that we're not having a White House that listens to the professionals. I think from some of the actions we saw this White House take early on with some bombing in Syria to many, many other levels of activities, I don't know if I could say there is a coherent policy right now we're doing in the Middle East, and if it's really left to just the president's son-in-law, that will make it even less coherent. So, Michael, one of the big concerns we have as well in Washington.
Wow. Mark in Valley, Washington. Mark, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. This is back to that BDS bill, and I've not heard anybody talk about this. Let's say it did get passed, wouldn't that set a precedent to where they could expand that to any type of protest?
Well, clear. Yeah, you're right, Mark. I mean, if that's starting to be the path of how we do things, you could be any issue that they don't want, they could essentially criminalize speech on, and that is one of the concerns that many have. Let's just face it, this White House already is doing a lot of things in this Congress. I mean, just in the last week, while we're marking up our bills and appropriations, they had a statement condemning UNESCO for something that they did in making Hebron a World Heritage Site. And, they're taking on a lot of different little statements and kind of throwing them into bills that, again, aren't that coherent policy that Michael from California was just asking about. And if you start taking more and more measures, regardless of the subject, and making it harder to be able to speak out about it, you're taking away our constitutional rights, which is our highest level right we should have. So I think should those bills ever come to the floor, those will certainly be the debates. But again, I haven't heard many at all in Congress say that these are the priority bills that they're going to be moving. So generally I'm dealing with whatever I know is coming up, which right now will be budget and appropriation bills. Most in the next week we'll start that with a mini omnibus around defense, MILCON, and Homeland Security, which could include, by the way, funding for the wall, which we have to keep our eye on, Tom, for the next week in the House. In fact, it will likely include funding for the wall. And, the other issues that are coming up around tax reform and some other things, I think that we'll see between July and September.
Rob, listening on Sirius XM in Mountain Iron, Minnesota. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good day, Tom, Congressman. My question pertains to repeal and replace, is where you just stated that many congressmen and many senators are multimillionaires. Isn't this a direct conflict of interest where the senators and congressmen get to be able to vote for this, and the whole thing is they're voting for themselves a tax cut, and they are voting at the same time to kill some of their constituents.
Rob, I wish I could disagree with you at some level, but what you're saying is unfortunately very accurate. I mean, for many of them, this is a tax cut they'll be voting on for themselves and for many people that they know very well that fund their campaigns, and that for many people, this will be essentially a death sentence. If you don't have health insurance and you're sick, with a lot of the people who have these very serious ailments, you will die. So you've said it succinctly, and the problem is, how do we make our House of Representatives and our Senate more representative of all of us? And I think a lot's going to fall onto 2018, the fall of 2018, in doing that. But part of what excites me is when I see these candidates that are now looking at running who don't come from a place of wealth or privilege.
Congressman,
You're
hitting a
listening
break
to
here.
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of Congressman Mark Pocan. And welcome back, Congressman Pocan. My apologies for cutting you off there. Once the machine starts the music, it's out of my control.
No worries.
Okay, great. Leslie, watching Free Speech TV in Central Square, New York. You are on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Hi, Mr. Pocan. My name is Leslie Dean, and we have a big problem with the FCC. If the FCC was doing its job, you guys in the Democratic Party would be winning, okay? First of all, they ran Trump for 2 years straight, you might as well say, 24/7, 700 days, and a little bit of Hillary and very little Bernie, and that's wrong. There shouldn't be an FCC if they aren't going to do their job. It's supposed to be equal, And you guys between Reagan and Clinton and Obama destroyed the fairness doctrine. I mean, if you guys had the fairness doctrine in, you guys wouldn't be losing at all. But Obama didn't put it in. He had a chance to. He doesn't want to. That tells me that the Democratic Party doesn't want truth coming out either. I mean, if you had the fairness doctrine, there would be no Rush Limbaugh, be no Hannity, be no.
Well,
Jones.
there would,
be none of those
Leslie.
people.
Actually, just a point of fact, there still would be Limbaughs and Hannitys, and me, for that matter. It's just that what the FCC said was two things. Number one, if a station put out an editorial, and I worked in radio back in the 70s, I'm very familiar with this. If a station put out an editorial position, they had to provide space for the other side to rebut it, only if it was the voice of the station, number one. And number two, that stations, radio and television stations, had to do what's called programming in the public interest, which was interpreted to mean in a small way, things like local PSAs, hey, there's going to be a bake sale at the school this week. But the bigger thing was actually providing real news. And that's why all the big networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, all of them lost money on their news operations until after the Telecommunications Act, or excuse me, until after the Fairness Doctrine was blown out of the water in 87, excuse me. And by the end of 87, all three networks, or maybe 88, all three networks had moved their news divisions under their entertainment divisions, and we were thrown into the world of infotainment. So with that, Leslie, thank you for the call. Congressman Pocan, your thoughts?
Yeah, Tom, thanks for explaining that. And I think what Leslie's saying is correct, right? I mean, with not having the Fairness Doctrine has made it so that news doesn't get the same priority that it used to. And now we've got an administration that's trying to rewrite things to facts and alternative facts and fake news. And now they're trying to further destroy people having information and facts. Instead, you just have to go to Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity to get your information here on the right, which, as we know, isn't really information. That's really well, that is the fake news that's out there. So Leslie's right. We should be doing everything we can to try to get back to a place where we had a fairness doctrine, where we had a balance of ideas that were out there and an emphasis on real news.
Yeah. In the meantime, what has happened is that, right-wing wealthy people, Rupert Murdoch, for example, and, the owners of several radio networks have just bought up all these properties all over the country. Do you see any possibility that the Sherman Act will be reinforced with regard to media?
Again, with this Congress, I don't see those things happening, unfortunately. But there's a lot of reforms we need to do if we can take back our House of Representatives, our Senate, and our White House.
On that. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Jeff in Sharpsburg, Georgia, listening on Sirius XM. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Thank you, Congressman Pocan. I really appreciate taking my call. I just had two quick questions. The first one is, they're both about the air traffic system. What are your thoughts on the privatization, and if it's good or bad for the FAA system? And also, is Congress really aware of the staffing crisis that the air traffic control system is in right now? Thank you.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you. First of all, no, I don't support privatization. Most of the big airlines, although I may be wrong on this, I believe Delta may be the outlier on this, want this because, of course, they can figure out how to monetize it and make it so they can make even more profit if it goes that way. This is a public safety, a public good, and I think privatization would be a very bad idea. And on the staffing crisis, I know those of us who talk to the folks who work in those centers certainly know that what's going on, and that we've got to make sure that we're addressing that as well. One other issue I'd mention too, I think that we've got to deal with is this competition from these highly subsidized airlines from overseas trying to come in and get space, and that's going to hurt some of the folks who are working for the companies that we have here. So there's a number of fronts right now. We're waiting to see what exactly will happen under the Trump administration, but I think this effort to privatize would be counterproductive for consumers in the end.
Joe in Pompano Beach, Florida. Hey, Joe, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. You're on with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen, and I won't be long. I just keep the issue was raised at different times that why can't healthcare insurance companies rather compete between different states throughout our whole country, i.e., I could buy insurance from Geico from California or throughout our whole country, as well as any other auto insurer for all of us, yet. Right now, that doesn't even get addressed in any of the legislation being put forth. And to me, it seems like it would be better for competition and maybe health costs would be lowered for people that really need it more so than others, say.
Yeah, Congressman, I'm confused by this. We had health insurance with, I don't want to name the company, but we had with them in Portland. Well, United Healthcare provided us with health insurance in Portland and here in D.C. We've also had it with Blue Cross Blue Shield, which I used to have back in Michigan. It seems to me like all these companies are selling their products in every state right now.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, the studies have shown that there's not a savings out of this. This is one of those talking points that we've seen put out there because it sounds like common sense, right? Why wouldn't you be able to buy outside your state lines? The problem is some states have different requirements on the health insurance, and people could then just be buying the lowest possible common denominator of a health policy, and that doesn't necessarily solve the health insurance side, and we're being told it actually won't really solve the cost side either. So while it's one of those things I think that's easy to put out there and it sounds extremely reasonable, the reality is it doesn't provide cost savings and would reduce the level and quality of health care if it actually was opened up.
Right, and Geico does tweak their car insurance policies from state to state to comply with state insurance commissioner policies. So even though they're selling nationwide, just like United Healthcare and Blue Cross and Aetna and everybody else, they do offer actually different plans from state to state.
I think ultimately if people are looking for cost savings, you look at something like Medicare for All single payer because you take away so many of the areas where money is wasted from marketing to administration to profit and other areas.
Yeah, and that would be true across state lines. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama, you are on with Congressman Pocan.
Good afternoon. I want to know if our representatives and our senators actually have stock in these health insurance companies. Is this the reason why we cannot have a public auction or expand Medicare because they're more concerned with their quarterly dividends?
Yeah, Norma, I'm sure a lot of people probably, if not direct purchase of stock, may have it through, some consolidated plans that they're investing in. The thing is, though, I honestly don't think that is the biggest indicator. I just think the fact that so many insurance companies have so many lobbyists and put so much money into political campaigns that's what gets the attention, right? I mean, people the people who fund your campaigns, when it's that kind of dollars and that kind of power through that, I think that's what's making people vote against their constituents. I don't think it's necessarily the stock side of things, from what I can tell in my conversations with people and from what I can see. So I think it has more to do with the political end of the work of some of the big insurance companies and for that matter, big pharma and others as well.
Gary in Irvine, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. I wanted to talk about the wall. You really don't need a wall. The problem is that they let these people come across and give them jobs. If you prosecute the companies that allow illegal aliens to come in and work, if you stop that and you enforce that law, then I think that you really don't need a wall.
Yeah, but that would involve putting rich white employers in jail rather than poor people of color. Congressman?
Yeah, that's not nearly as much on talking point for the Republicans, is it? No, Gary, what you say is right. If we had actually the employers followed the law, that would solve much of the problem. I would argue, though, the whole premise that people are rushing across the border to come here isn't true and hasn't been true for quite some time. So we're dealing with a fallacy that really deals more with, for many, just their fear of people who have a different color of skin than anything else. So I don't even like to give them the fallacy that there's this bleeding somehow into the United States to do this. However, if you really wanted to address what they claim is the concern, Gary, you're right. You could have employers actually following the law, and that would take care of things.
Congressman, we have just in the neighborhood of a minute before the end of the hour. Your thoughts on the coming week and what we should be looking for, what we should be doing?
Yeah, so this is the last week before we leave for 5 weeks for the August recess. So things to look for. Health care still on the Senate side. I think there'll still probably be some last-minute attempt possible. And then on the House side, we're doing this first mini omnibus bill, which will have the wall funding and those issues, as well as potentially some sanction bills, and it's not clear yet what they could be. So this is an important week to watch for and call your member of Congress and your senator, because a lot of activity will happen because people are going to go home and they want to, pound on their chest they did something, because let's face it, for the first 6 months of the year, we haven't done anything. So watch it. It's going to be an active, fast week, and we need to be vigilant to be on top of things to defeat really bad ideas.
And the number for Congress, if you want to call your member of Congress, is 202-224-3121. And Congressman, a lot of people have been complaining that Republicans are simply not answering their phones right now. What do you do?
Send them an email, because still that gets in and gets counted as a contact. So if they're playing that game and they just don't have enough people to answer the phones, because more people are active and calling, send that email. If you send a letter, they may not get it for 3 weeks to Washington because it has to be screened for ricin and other things. Send an email.
Yeah. What about contacting local districts?
Contact the local district office. They'll keep the contacts get counted there as well, and sometimes those phones are easier to get through.
That's great. Congressman Mark Pocan, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, congressman representing Wisconsin. Pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Always great talking. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Bob Ney's book, Sideswiped, Lessons Learned Courtesy of the Hitmen of Capitol Hill. Bob was the only member of Congress. He was a Republican congressman. In fact, he was the guy who invented the phrase freedom fries. That far right, yes. He was the only member of Congress who spoke Farsi, which is the language they speak in Iran. The Iranian government, during the Bush administration, George W. Bush, sent a letter to, or delivered a letter to Bob in Farsi, because he spoke Farsi, saying that they were willing to recognize Israel and stop their nuclear program in exchange for recognition by the United States. Bob delivered that to the Bush White House, and within a short time, Bob found himself in a federal prison. And that letter never surfaced, and that rapprochement never happened. It's an amazing story. It's too long to read as an excerpt, but it's in the book. And, you know, that was the end of Bob's political career. Now he's working for Talk Media News. But this is from chapter 17 of his book. It's titled Political Strong-Arming. I had a major blowout over the Head Start program with Andy Card, President George W. Bush's chief of staff. The first of the legislation debates centered on Head Start. John Boehner was doing his best to acquire votes to hurt the program. I had supported Head Start for years as an Ohio State senator and again as a U.S. congressman. When George Bush became president, however, every issue, including this one, was treated as though, if lost, it would be the end of the world, as if winning were vital to save the presidency. Speaker Hastert became a lapdog for President Bush. Didn't matter whether it was overspending, crushing unions, or ripping the legs out from under Head Start. Hastert acted like the president ran the House instead of the other way around. I found myself under intense pressure to vote against Head Start. I was bombarded by all sides, Tom DeLay, Hastert's staff, and the chairman of the Education Committee, which at the time was John Boehner. I found it amazing that a sitting president would make a do-or-die issue over taking money away from poor children who needed a jump on school, a Head Start. Anyone in the field of education knew that Head Start had a rocky beginning, but it had proven to be statistically and socially a very fine program, and I had always supported it. I had a private hideaway, an office the Speaker gives to leaders and long-term older members of Congress that very few people knew about. Even Brian Walsh, my press secretary, was unaware. On this particular evening, I was in that Capitol hideaway, one floor directly below the chamber. I was sick and tired of being lobbied and bullied on this vote. I had to escape the arm twisting. I used to say it was so bad that you could hear the bones snap on the floor of the House. My private phone in the hideaway was ringing, so I knew that only Ted Vander Meade of the Speaker's office could have given it out. Chris Kruger, my executive assistant, answered it and signaled me that it was Andy Card, the White House chief of staff. Andy said, "We need this Head Start vote. It's critical to the Bush administration's future." I was stunned at this. The entire future of the Bush administration was predicated on beating up on little unfortunate kids by taking away their Head Start funding. I thought this was idiocy and stupid politics. I said, I have always supported Head Start over my entire career. I don't like this vote, and I just cannot help you. Card blew up at me and responded with, "Let me make this clear. Boehner said you were a vote for us, and we are holding you to that." I don't know where Boehner got that from, I said. I can rethink this, but I don't like it, and I'm sure I will not change my mind. Andy then said, "You are an effing liar," only he spells out the word. And I said, "F you, Andy, and your idiotic administration." And I hung up on him. I went to the floor of the House where Boehner confronted me. I told him, Andy is disrespectful, way out in left field on this. He can kiss my ass and F him, period. Boehner continued to strong-arm me. They were one vote short.
It boiled down to the fact that this vote was so hideous, so wrong, that they simply could not get the votes. One of my best friends in Congress, Steve LaTourette, took a bullet for me on this to move the bill along. He told him to back off on me and he would help through the process in the House, but not necessarily if or when the vote came back from the Senate. The second time Andy Card ran afoul of Congress, he had to confront Congressman Steve LaTourette. Steve was one of the finest members of Congress, very brave in his positions, an independent thinker, good at politics, and no wallflower. He's conservative on some issues, but he cares deep down about working people and how they survive in America. At this writing, Steve has left Congress, frustrated with the lack of acceptance of moderates within the Republican Party. Andy Card decided that he wanted to remove Davis-Bacon, a federal law that requires payment of prevailing wages to workers on public works projects, from the Transportation Appropriation Bill. Don Young was a strong transportation chairman and let LaTourette take the lead on the issue. I dug into Andy's history and found some interesting things. He'd been a Massachusetts state rep. He'd worked for President Bush's father, Bush 41. When Bush 41 lost to Clinton, Andy felt that the transportation bill had done the president no good, and he disliked labor unions, and he disliked unions in general. We all kept up a tough front. Transportation unions lobbyist for the building trades, like Tim James, was very effective and helped the labor Republicans push back. Bush 43, though, kept putting up roadblocks at every step. He simply did not want a transportation bill that might support the unions. John Mica, Transportation Subcommittee Chair, during a private Republican caucus meeting, made the best statement of the day. John said, "Hell, the president doesn't think we need a bill. As he travels in cities by car, they stop all the traffic for his motorcade. He thinks there are no traffic problems. The streets are deserted." We all howled. So anyhow, there's just all these amazing inside stories about how Congress actually works. It's pretty grim. The book Sideswiped by Bob Ney.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Congressman Keith Ellison, the Deputy Director of the DNC. As a congressman, he represents the 5th District of Minnesota and does so brilliantly. His website, ellison.house.org, .house.gov. And in the capacity of the Deputy Director of the DNC, Democrats.org. And you can tweet him at Keith Ellison. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Hey, man, great to be on with you. And, you're just, I was listening to the show before and just doing some of that base level, civic education, information, very important.
Thank you.
We don't do nearly enough of it.
Thank you.
We got to do a lot more.
Yeah, we do the best we can here. So there's, a lot going on in Congress right now and in the world and in the Democratic Party. And I understand that you'd like to take some calls from listeners, that you're available for the whole half hour.
I am, and I would love to. I love talking to the folks, man, so let's do it.
Great. Okay. Before we get to that, I'm just wondering if there's any message that you want to share with folks or anything that, your thoughts on what we need to be paying attention to right now politically, where the Democratic Party is at, stuff like that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Let me just say that from a standpoint of winning elections, and I think that is a conversation that we all better pay a lot of attention to, because when we lose, right? So just think about the folks who are, having to worry about losing their health care because of who won the last election. I just want to say that the real thing we got to focus on, and that we need to do this summer, and we're doing it through Resistance Summer, is presence. What does that mean? That means that I don't care what message you come up with. You can come up with the best message in the world. If you don't get it to people's doorstep, through their ears, through the radio, through their, through the phone, then it doesn't really matter. We have got to remember that, making sure we got a strong message is part of that means presence, means being in the room with folks, listening, hearing their feedback, and sharing some thoughts on how we all move forward. It's not just do a poll, come up with some a message or some magic words, and then good, we got it. No, that's not nearly good enough. You've got to then deliver it. And that's why, I appreciate your show so much, because you're getting there, man. And
Thank
that's
you.
why, we're pushing the this Democrats Live thing that we do, which is a live stream we do every Wednesday from the DNC, and that's why we're trying to push the message out all the time.
So the Democrats Live people could see over at democrats.org every Wednesday at what time?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock? Cool.
Yep.
Okay. All right. You want to pick up some phone calls?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go for it. Steve in Simi Valley, California. Steve, you are on the air with Congressman Keith Ellison.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Tom. A question. I'm a FERS retiree, and I know that Donald Trump and the Republicans want to eliminate the FERS Social Security supplement. So I know they came out with their budget. I just want to know what the congressman thought the chances are that they're going to eliminate that on this year's budget.
So let me answer that question as honestly and directly as I can. They'd like to eliminate it, and if we don't fight back, they probably will. I mean, the budget that they dropped, I've seen a lot of ugly, scary-looking Republican budgets. I lived through sequester, the Budget Control Act. We've seen all that nasty stuff. This is the single worst proposal I have ever seen from any Republican ever. And, yeah, they're going straight at public employees. They're going straight at the FERS program. For people who don't know what that is the federal retirement program that federal employees are in. And it's not unlike other, retirement security programs that other folks work for. But this one is called FERS. They got others. There's CalPERS in California. There's all kinds of different retirement savings programs people are in who work a lifetime. And they've earned that benefit. And yet the Republican talking point is that it's too expensive. We can't afford it. Basically, they want to cut people's retirement security so that they can get a bigger tax cut to rich people so that they can use that money to buy off more politicians. That's kind of what their game plan has been and is. I can tell you this, likely compromise language will be, we'll leave the people alone who've already gotten into the program, but we're going to reduce new employees, which is wrong too, right? So they're starting out really bad. Conventional wisdom says that they're going to make some kind of a compromise, but the compromise is going to be bad too. What about people worked a lifetime expecting to retire, right? Let's start there. And actually, people don't have enough money to retire on. We should be talking about how to expand Social Security and retirement benefits. We should be trying to return to a program where you have a defined benefit program as opposed to just, put your money on the stock market and hope for the best. So that's my best answer.
Amen. Well said. Todd in Tacoma, Washington. You are on the air with Congressman Keith Ellison.
Hi, this is Todd from Tacoma, Washington. I was wondering about any legislation on the U.S. Postal Service privatization or 5-day delivery, or like the FERS you were just talking about, it will affect the post office. So what legislation is out there for the U.S. Postal Service?
Let's talk Postal Service. Thank you for the question. Let me just say as a preliminary matter, the Postal Service is a venerated American institution which has gotten us the mail that we need for literally centuries, started by, I believe, Benjamin Franklin.
It was. He was our nation's first postmaster general, I believe.
Yeah, but you should also know that the post office has been hiring people of color since immediately after the Civil War, has hired more veterans, more women, and has been that place of employment that, people who have been working class folks and people from racial minorities and women could expect to get employed in and do meaningful and important work and advance themselves, put themselves into a middle class job. The post office is, I think, it's the biggest public employee union. I might be wrong, but if it's one of the biggest for sure,
I believe you're right.
I think I am right about that. So that's just what I want to say off top. So some people want to attack it. Oh, by the way, the Postal Service is not a unit of government. It is a quasi-government corporation, and it has been up until a piece of legislation back in, I believe, 2006 was definitely in the black, and it would be in the black now if it were not for this ridiculous legislative mandate which requires them to pre-fund health care and retirement benefits. Now, okay, now let's talk health. Now let's talk post office. There are companies like Pitney Bowes and a few others that are trying to get that money. They want to take over it because they want to take all the profitable centers and then leave the rest, basically the last mile. That means that they want to fly it around and charge you $5 to send a letter, but they want to leave it so that the postal service can be left with the least profitable part of it, and basically that's the last mile delivery. It's not true that the post office is failing because of the internet. In fact, because of online shopping, they've seen a boost in parcel delivery. That's important for people to know. But there have been proposals to go to 5-day. There have been proposals to have like these centralized boxes, which means they don't deliver to your door, but they deliver to some spot in your neighborhood. And there have been legislative proposals on all of that. There have been, I think that the Postal Service is as big a fight as any because, one, they want to crack that union. Two, they want to take out the profitable parts and leave the rest to wither. Three, they want to they don't like the government. And the Postal Service is quasi-government still. They don't like the idea of the government doing good things for people because they want only they want to concentrate power in the hands of corporations and individuals, not the public. So they're after the post office. All of us need to be clear as crystal about that and fight for it, defend it, and make sure we fight for it. So, yeah, there's plenty of proposals out there to cut the post office, 5-day, all kinds of stuff. We should resist it all. In fact, we should be allowing postal banking.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Keith Ellison right after this. And welcome back. Congressman, sorry to step on you there. Once that machine starts with the break music, I've got no control over it, and it shuts us down after about 10 or 15 seconds.
No, man, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, okay. So let's pick up some more phone calls here. Denny in Berwyn, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Keith Ellison.
Hi, Mr. Ellison. I'm really, really concerned about the bill for Israel, that we cannot protest against Israel. I have a real hard time with that because my family fought the Nazis in the Second World War. They actually stole our homes, and my father lost his hand, and they were fighting the Germans, the Nazis, with pitchforks. And, I've talked to my dad, a couple of people about this, And, this bill, and I'm going to use the word because it's the proper word. You can't hide from it. Throwing people in jail for 20 years, because in the United States, listen, if we're going to get rid of health care and do all this other stuff, I don't even recognize this country. But if you do that, that's as close to Nazism as you can get. And that's the proper word for this. It's not improper to use that word. And my father reminded me once a long time ago, Nazis aren't Germans. They could be anybody. It just depends what's going on and who's in power. And that's the problem. But to put a law like that, and I'm a veteran, to put a law like that, to even think about that law, to me, is a disgrace to this country, disgrace to the flag. And any Democrat that votes for this, I probably won't vote Democratic ever again, because this bill is a disgrace to freedom.
Okay.
That's what this bill is.
Congressman, are you familiar with the legislation he's talking about?
Yeah, I have been. I'm familiar with it. I'm still digging into it. I will tell you that it does raise some very scary First Amendment possibilities. And so, definitely I think it's important to highlight that so that we can all focus our attention on it.
Yeah, I noticed there's some good Democrats who signed on to this thing. I'm guessing that a lot of people just, it's a nice Israel bill, let's go for it, not realizing that there was this attack on the First Amendment inside it.
Yeah, I think that if people raise it up, talk about it, write about it, that it will give a heightened understanding to the critical First Amendment considerations there.
Yeah, and we all need to get on that. Let's see. We just have 1 minute, Congressman, before we're going to hit a break and rejoin our commercial stations. But we're still with our nonprofit stations and with Free Speech TV. In that minute, I'm curious your thoughts on the current state of affairs in the Middle East.
Right. Well, 1 minute to talk about the Middle East.
Yeah,
wow.
I'm sorry.
Well, let me just say this about the Middle East. The United States has historically taken a position on the Middle East, which is essentially transactional. We supported people who supported us. We made sure that there was a free flow of oil. We supported any country that supported Israel, our ally there. And we, of course, were always ready to fight anybody who was ready to fight what they identified as terrorism. Sometimes it really is terrorism. Sometimes it's more questionable, like in the case of certain leaders like al-Sisi, I believe, calls certain people terrorists because he wants to marginalize them politically and not necessarily because they're engaged in that. So we need to develop a richer network, and we need to of connectivity with the Middle East as a whole. We need to have better relationships than simply with the Saudis. We need to expand friendships and allyships beyond Israel.
There we go.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Congressman Keith Ellison on the line with us, and Rich in Chicago, listening on WCPT. You are on the air with Congressman Ellison.
Hey, Congressman and Tom, thank you so much for the show. I've been thinking about this for a little bit, and I wonder, when a congressman takes the oath of office to support the Constitution of the United States, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide the common defense, and promote general welfare, I don't understand why healthcare isn't a part of that. How do we spend $1 trillion for the defense of America, for all these weapons and stuff, but not the general well-being of the public? I don't know why Democrats don't scream this at the top of their lungs, that they're sticking to their oath and protecting the people by having single payer or a healthcare system that provides healthcare for everybody, not just a few, just like we do military protection. Where am I missing it?
Well, I think you're missing it because you don't give out those of us who fight for health care every single day any credit. That's where I think you're missing it. I think there's a general sense among some that always trashing what we're doing is the right thing to do. I mean, how can you say John Conyers and Barbara Lee and Bernie Sanders and even me are not fighting for health care every single day? Of course we fight for it because it's part of the general welfare. We do it all the time. The real problem is that I talk to folks who say, how come nobody's saying anything about XYZ? And it's not true. We are saying it. I'm saying it now. I believe that it is a right to have health care access and go to a doctor when you're sick. That's why for the last 10 years I've been on John Conyers' single payer bill. I mean, but I got to tell you, I agree with you, but the problem is that there, among so many people, there is just this reflexive need to say the Democrats aren't doing this and not doing that when we're clearly doing it. Yeah. Now, we might not be doing it well enough for you. In that case, listen to Thom Hartmann, and when we say something that you think is right, be able to say, yeah, I actually heard Keith Ellison say that he believes health care is a right. He said that he believes that that right can be found in the preamble to the Constitution about promoting the general welfare. Tell somebody the good news that we're actually on your side as opposed to say, they never are for anything. I mean, it's just not true. And it's incredibly frustrating when we can't get our own folks to even see that we're for them.
Yeah. Part of it is the media, though. I mean, it's like it's all Trump all the time, or all this or that.
No, that's true.
And they very rarely, if a Republican, for example, Al Gore just came out in favor of single payer. And if a former Republican vice president and presidential candidate had come out in favor or against any part of the Republican health care bill, it would have been national news. But when a Democrat says it, the media just ignores it.
They're like, oh, did that happen? Oh,
yeah, right.
We don't find that interesting. So, I mean, I think that I just want to say to the caller, look, man, I definitely feel you. You're not seeing and hearing enough from us. That's why I'm talking today. That's why we're doing Democrats Live. That's why we are working day and night, because there is a growing awareness that you can't just take the right position. You have got to make sure that people know what position you're taking. And that is as important as taking the position that really promotes what I believe is a constitutional right to be able to seek and get quality and affordable health care. So that's the deal. But we need to work together on this stuff. It needs to be a partnership. And in the day of social media, you can tweet out that the Democrats that support, $15 minimum wage, support universal health care. Gore came out for single payer. You can help us get that message out, and we need you to.
Okay. Mark in San Francisco. We're down to 90 seconds here before before Congressman Ellison has to go, and we hit a hard break. So, Mark, a real quick question for the Congressman.
Well, gentlemen, basically, I think the Democratic message should be there's millions of jobs already in the United States with infrastructure and green energy, and to tie the infrastructure with putting like solar panels on buildings, putting turbines on bridges, and really push for a jobs program with green energy and infrastructure. I think that's the message that would really carry well in this country.
Congressman?
I agree. Good idea. And I think a whole lot of folks agree with you. Let's trumpet that to the four corners of the universe so that the world knows the Democrats are about putting people to work and improving our infrastructure, and can do both.
How is it that, in the 45 seconds we have left here, how is it that Trump can say that he campaigned on $1 trillion infrastructure bill, and now he's talking about, privatizing our infrastructure? It's like whipsaw.
Well,
Whiplash, excuse me.
He said he was going to get health care to everybody, and it was going to be cheaper. That's not true.
Right.
He said he was going to, he said a lot of things that he's already reneged on. I mean, this guy wants to cut Medicaid to folks who need it desperately. I mean, I think that we got to just. I mean, it's hard to admit that you just got lied to and fooled, but he did fool people. It's not their fault. He told them something that wasn't true, and so now it's time to just fess up and deal with that. And I just like the caller said.
Congressman Keith Ellison, you're doing great work as Deputy Director of the DNC and representing Minnesota and everything else you're doing. Thanks so much for being with us today, sir.
Thank you, sir. Take care. We'll see you next week, maybe.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Ellison.house.org, Democrats.org, and you can tweet him at Keith Ellison. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Yeah, it's Ellison.house.gov, not org. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Thom Hartmann University, to our book club. We're reading today from The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. And this is from page 60. The chapter is Extinctions, Diversity Supports Survival. The consolidation of power and wealth in the hands of a very few rich individuals and multinational corporations has made some businessmen and politicians rich, but it's also aggregating and wiping out resources. We're directly competing with every other form of life on the planet. As long as there was more out there to exploit, growth was possible. Now, as we approach the closed limits of our planet's capacities to generate food and process our wastes,
Sustainable growth has to be re-examined for the oxymoron it is. And even if nature doesn't kill us off, it seems that we're bent on doing it ourselves, or to ourselves. Pesticide use in the United States is up over 3,000% since World War II, yet more pesticides doesn't mean fewer crops lost to insects. To the contrary, we're losing 20% more of our crops to insects than in 1945. But because of increasing insect resistance to pesticides and mechanized farming techniques, the pesticide industry has economically addicted many farmers to their product. Harmless species are disappearing, but no harmful insect species has been eradicated. But while the insects, who can evolve through hundreds to millions of generations during the period of a single human lifespan generation, are becoming immune to our pesticides, we are not. This leaves us vulnerable to the poisons that we ourselves manufacture to kill off another species. For example, in September 1997, the New York Times featured a story by reporter John H. Cushman Jr. titled, "Cancer in Kids Increases, New Toxins Suspected." The story chronicled how the rate of cancer among children in the United States has skyrocketed since the 1970s, when we were using far less than half of the agricultural chemicals we are now, to the point now where the odds are 1 in 600 of a child born today getting cancer before the age of 10. Childhood cancer has become the second leading cause of childhood death behind accidents, and is now the most common fatal childhood disease, accounting for fully 10% of all childhood deaths. Since 1973, for example, rates of acute lymphoblastic leukemia increased 27% in boys and girls, and brain cancer is up 40% over the same period. 99% of all U.S. mother's milk today contains detectable levels of DDT. In 1950, it was found that 0.5%, 0.5% of U.S. male college students were infertile. In 1978, a study found that number had skyrocketed to 25%. And in the past 32 years, the average American male's sperm production has dropped by 30%. Some researchers attribute this to the accumulation of chlorinated hydrocarbon pesticides, which are often intended to render insects sterile, while others speculate that some plastics used in food packaging mimic the female hormone estrogen, and may be demasculizing men and increasing the risk of breast and uterine cancer in women. But that's just the beginning of the problem. In 1960, routine feeding of antibiotics to farm animals was virtually unknown. Antibiotic administration of meat animals has increased so much since then, however, that today over 55% of all antibiotics manufactured in the United States are put into animals or animal feed. This has turned our livestock into a vast breeding ground for antibiotic-resistant microorganisms. The American pharmaceutical and meat industries don't consider this a problem, nor do the politicians to whom they contribute millions of dollars a year, and continue to support the routine administration of these drugs to dairy and meat animals. But that stance is hardly supported by any common knowledge in science. The European Economic Community, the Common Market, has banned American meat products grown with antibiotics. Why? The research which so concerned the Europeans showed that in 1960, only 13% of American human staphylococcus infections were resistant to penicillin. By 1988, however, the number of penicillin-resistant staph infections in Americans had exploded to over 90%. Muppets creator Jim Henson was killed by such a drug-resistant infection, for example, despite his substantial wealth and his access to the most sophisticated and expensive healthcare system in the world. And it's not just on land. Ocean studies specialist James W. Porter at the University of Georgia points to the explosion of human viruses and bacteria filling the water of the planet's oceans, killing off coral reefs and spreading disease among humans and other life forms. He projects that 20 to 30% of coral reefs are at risk, with a 446% increase in infections just since 1996 among the reefs he has been monitoring off the Florida coast. University of South Florida researcher Joan B. Rose points out that between 20 and 24% of all people swimming in Florida's coastal beaches become infected with viruses, which can cause heart disease, ear infections, sore throats and eyes, meningitis, gastrointestinal disease, hepatitis, and diabetes. About 1%, she says, become chronically infected. Similarly, a sampling of shellfish from New York waters found over 40% infected with human pathogens. And a sampling of water from the Waikiki Beach in Hawaii found that more than a third of the samples tested were infected with human viruses. At the same time, Vermont ice cream manufacturer Ben & Jerry's is suing the government. They want to put on the label of their ice cream that the milk they use is from cows free of synthetic growth hormones, and it continues with that sort of story. So this is just, one piece of the last hours of Ancient Sunlight. Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us, live from the American Federation of Teachers Radio Row, is Kwame Alexander. Kwame Alexander is the author of more than 24 books, including The Crossover, a poet, educator, and co-founder of Leap for Ghana, an international literacy program. The website is kwamealexander.com. You can tweet at KWAME Alexander, at Kwame Alexander. Kwame, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. So tell us about your program, the Leap for Ghana program.
So I'm building a library in Ghana, in West Africa. I've been going to Ghana for 5 years. I went initially to participate in a ceremony where a friend of mine was becoming the queen of a village. And it was really miraculous and marvelous. And they asked me to read to the kids in the school. And I read to 200 kids from my book. It's a picture book called Acoustic Rooster and His Barnyard Band. It's about a rooster that starts a jazz band with Duck Ellington and Mules Davis.
And I love it.
And so I read to these kids in this makeshift classroom with no walls, no ceiling. And after I read, while I was reading, a rooster walked up beside me, which was the funniest thing ever. And then I asked for more books, and they brought a book. And I said, where are your other books? Where's your library? And they had 200 kids, 11 classrooms, 11 teachers, and 1 book in the entire school.
Wow.
And I decided in that moment I was going to do something to just help, to offer some assistance in helping them get more books, train teachers in literacy, provide scholarships for kids to go to high school, and build a library. So I'm really excited that we're going back on Monday. We cut the ribbon after 5 years on our library in the eastern region of Ghana.
That is great. I know when President Obama went to Ghana, Radio Bulisa I believe Bulisa is the capital city.
Accra.
Accra, that's right, Accra is. But anyway, the town of Bulisa has a radio station, and they wanted to pick up a radio show, and they picked up our show and carried it for a couple of years. I don't know if they still are or not, but we were on the air in Ghana for
that's great
for some time. Yeah. So how can people find out more about what you're doing, and how can people help out?
You can go to kwamealexander.com to find out sort of more stuff on what's going on with me and the writing and the books. And you can go to Leap for Ghana, LEAP as in Paul, FOR, Ghana, GHANA.com or .org. And you can find out more information about the work we're doing with the library and also donate, whether you want to donate books or cash. Cash is always great.
Yeah, that's absolutely marvelous. Right. And what else are you up to right now?
Writing books, man. Writing novels for kids, trying to inspire kids, trying to entertain and empower kids, traveling to schools and conferences and speaking about my love of literature and taking my kid to basketball and tennis camp every day.
Yeah, that's great. That is wonderful. KwameAlexander.com is the website, and also leapforghana.org, you said?
Right, you got it.
Okay, and you can tweet him at Kwame Alexander. Kwame, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's been great talking with you. I do appreciate it. Also on the line with us right now is Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation of Teachers. AFT.org is the website. President Weingarten, welcome back to the program. It's been too long.
I know, Tom. I mean, first off, you've just been too busy fighting all the fights and making sure that there is some accurate reporting about what's going on in Crazy Town here.
Yeah, we are doing our best. We are absolutely doing our best. And we just had Kwame Alexander on from the AFT Radio Row. How's everything going with the American Federation of Teachers?
Well, look, this is what's so unbelievable right now. We have in Washington, despite the heat, 1,400 educators from around the country who often come on their own dime to actually be in a conference to hone in their craft and to do and to learn new strategies to actually help kids, individual kids, get a good education. That is who public school school teachers are, and that is who our union is. We spend the money, we devote the resources to doing this kind of professional development. And meanwhile, when we're here doing this and fighting against the budget cuts that DeVos and Trump have put in to eliminate all summer school programs, all after-school programs, all lowering of class size, all professional development programs, we're here doing that and fighting those budget cuts. Meanwhile, Betsy DeVos is meeting with the corporate lobbyists, the billionaires, the privateers who want to privatize education, and she takes us on as opposed to helping us help school children. And frankly, she wants to do this as a private citizen, as a gazillionaire, a billionaire. The First Amendment allows people to do whatever they want to do. But how dare she do this as a as a person who's taken an oath of office to protect and defend and help all children? How dare she do the things she is doing to undermine, destabilize, and defund public education, which is the only system of education that has been there for the children, for all of the children in the United States of America.
Yeah, I think when Reagan put Bill Bennett in charge of the Education Department, which in itself was kind of a debacle. I mean, Bennett had campaigned when he ran for president in, I think it was 76, on ending the Department of Education. Right. I mean, it's just like Betsy DeVos. It's like, but Bennett didn't do anything close to the damage that Betsy DeVos is doing. This is strategic. Exactly. This is well funded. It's in every state. So what are you doing? What is the AFT doing, the American Federation of Teachers and other teachers unions doing to fight back against this? And what can we do? What can I do? What can our listeners do to support your efforts and to stand up for our public schools?
Fantastic. So there's 4 things that you can do, and I really appreciate the question. Number 1 is to know what the truth is, that we resist injustice and we fight injustice as we have the AFT for the 100 years of our history. We're not perfect, but that is what we do. And number 2 is that we reclaim the promise of public education, meaning we fight for the things that we think will work to help all kids learn. And so what we are doing right now is we are fighting against the federal budget cuts that go against schools. And in state after state, we've been fighting that as well. So when, our teachers and parents go into communities around the country, and when we go in and ask for communities' help, we need that help. We know that parents are with us. We know communities are with us. 3/4, a recent poll we just took said 3/4 of the people polled are opposed to the DeVos Trump budget cuts, and they're also opposed to these kind of defunding of public schools in order to give them to charters and vouchers. So right now, as we're speaking, people can go to their federally elected officials, senators or congresspeople, and say, please vote no for the DeVos Trump budget cuts to education that will directly hurt kids. That's number 1. Number 2, help us when we are helping, when we're doing home visits to parents in schools. Help us when we are fighting to make every public school a place where parents want to send their kids and educators want to work and kids are engaged.
Seems like some solid stuff. What is your prognosis for the future? What are the trend lines right now?
Look, at the end of the day, people are, what we're seeing is that people are really supporting public schools. And when it comes to, just like in healthcare, when it comes to the DeVos agenda in public schools, the DeVos agenda to eliminate public schools, because I agree with you, not Reagan, Bush, no Republican president has ever actually actively tried to destabilize and defund public schools at the same exact time as they were promoting other alternatives. Some of them promoted other alternatives, but they also thought that public schools were important. This is the first time we have somebody who's actively trying to end public schools as we know them. So what's happening is that people are rising up, and people want their public schools. They want them to be, the ones that don't work, they want them to be better, but they want their public schools. So I think if we continue this fight and continue to resist injustice and have a path forward that people support us on, I think that we will prevail. But there's a very, very important event in between these days of 17 and 18, which is the November 2018 elections. If people vote for people who believe in public education, believe in having a good economy that works for all, then we will, then our prognosis will be good.
Amen. Okay, Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers, AFT.org. You can tweet her at @rweingarten. President Weingarten, thank you.
Thanks so much, Tom. Really
Great talking.
appreciate it.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to check in with Talk Media News in a minute, and we'll also continue taking your calls and Anything Goes Friday. And welcome back. Chris, listening to us on TuneIn Radio in Las Vegas, Nevada. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, Tom. So I guess kind of anything goes. I just have a couple of questions. You haven't had, the last time you had Brian Fisher on was when Brian was trying, I know he's not here to defend himself, but he was saying that Jesus would condemn torture, and you were trying, it's a great YouTube clip, and you were like, would Jesus condemn torture? And he hasn't been back on the show. Were you so horrified by that interview that you just said no more? You were going to bring him on after that?
I frankly don't remember, Chris. That was like that was more than a year ago, wasn't it? I mean,
yeah.
I think Brian has, if I'm remembering the right person, Brian Fisher was with like the Family Research Council or one of these largely anti-gay groups, as I recall.
Yeah.
Okay, and hyper Christians. By and large, those people have just started refusing to come on the program. I love to debate right-wing crackpots, and I think it's informative, it's entertaining, and people, unfortunately, in this media environment that we have, people don't hear people pushing back against the right-wing crazies. And so, I try to get them on, but a lot of them just won't come on anymore. So.
Right. And then kind of a personal question. I know you were saying that you still have some family. They live up in Portland. I'm actually originally from Salem, Oregon. That's how I found you when you were on KPOJ.
Uh-huh.
And, maybe when you and Louise, might retire, are you thinking you might retire, back in Oregon? Maybe, I know I was going to tell you Lars Larson actually was on Fox News, the local embarrassment up there, and he just made such a fool of himself on the new Eric Bowling show. Oh my gosh. Yeah,
God, heaven only knows, Chris. I can't predict what the future brings, but Chris, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. By the way, I've got to share just this one thing with you. And thank you, Chris, for the call. This is from, the White House every day lets the press know what the president's schedule is. This was today's release, to the press from the White House of what the president's schedule is. I don't know if they're writing these things like by way of saying, hey, he's not doing anything. This is what it says. In the morning, President Donald J. Trump will receive his daily intelligence briefing. As I recall, he has told us that those take about 15 minutes. The president will then participate in a credentials ceremony for newly appointed ambassadors to Washington, D.C. In the afternoon, the president will visit with survivors of the USS Arizona. That would be the plane that, the ship, one of the ships that was blown up in Pearl Harbor, I believe. Is it? Or I don't know the deal with the Arizona, but in any case, it's ceremonial stuff. It's like, really? It's quite remarkable. Meanwhile, in Poland and in Venezuela, in both these countries right now, tens to hundreds of thousands of people are in the streets protesting efforts by the governments of both countries to amend their constitutions and push them harder to the right. Meanwhile, here in the United States, you've got groups funded by petro-billionaires and others that are trying to get 34 states to call for a constitutional convention so they can rewrite our Constitution. And nobody's in the streets. It's a little shocking.
And probably because nobody knows that, this effort to amend the Constitution is happening. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by Loving What You Do, Alan Ratner's new book, and goatsfortheoldgoat.com. And, push the wrong button there. On the line with us, Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News. Hey, Patrick, what's going on in the world today?
Hey, we are all sort of taking a look at what's coming out of the White House today with regards to Sean Spicer.
Oh, yeah, he's got Melissa McCarthy's old job on Saturday Night Live, right?
I know. I feel like she really did him in. Maybe.
I think between that and whatever. It's really hard to figure out what's going on with this White House. But he quit. He wasn't fired.
That's right. He resigned.
Although he was terribly dissed at the Vatican. He was that whole party. He was the one guy in that group that was like an enthusiastic practicing Catholic who was giddy about meeting the Pope, and they basically made him wait in the car.
This will be one of these tell-all books. Just making an assumption here that he'll move on to write one. That's totally interesting. He's technically resigning in the wake of President Trump offering Anthony Scaramucci the job of White House Communications Director, and which essentially sort of put him at the same par as Spicer. And Spicer, told Mr. Trump that he thought this was a big mistake, and also I think thought that because Scaramucci really has very little, if no experience, that Spicer would, essentially be training him on the job. But, Spicer's saga is an interesting one and does, I think, speak a little bit to sort of what takes place in the Trump administration. On the one hand, Spicer is this classic D.C. insider, well-liked, well-respected. Obviously a partisan, but, went to all the right cocktail parties, knew all the right people, had all the right relationships. Not the kind of person you thought would join the Trump administration. So it did take a lot of people by surprise. And then, of course, when he gets up there and has, as Melissa McCarthy will demonstrate, a fairly disastrous 6-month run, really starting from the beginning with that highly bizarre press conference on a Saturday afternoon criticizing everybody for their reporting on Trump's inauguration size. It just seemed like at all stages Spicer was trying to put on a mask or play a character that never quite fit, and yet he did so gladly. Although he never seemed like he quite loved that job. And I think going forward, for your listeners who don't know, Anthony Scaramucci is a longtime friend of Trump's. Hedge fund manager.
Well, he also was a co-host of one of Fox Business Channel's shows, and I'm guessing that Trump saw him on TV a lot and thought, "Oh, this guy can be a communications director."
You're exactly right. He's a regular on Fox News. Not surprising, is a big friend of Sean Hannity's, but he also has no experience running a press operation as a communications director, which I think, from Trump's vantage point, doesn't matter. Someone like Sean Spicer did and does, have a lot of experience in that regard. And yet Trump always wanted a showman. He always wanted a Laura Ingraham type. Even Sarah Huckabee Sanders, while probably not Trump's ideal, at least play the part better, push back, almost relished in the combat, whereas Spicer always seemed as if, he's a little bit on unsure footing there. And so you can see, what will be interesting is this story dovetails nicely with another sort of story that's been happening around D.C., which is, of course, the increasing almost disappearance of White House press briefings, both in a literal sense, meaning they happen less frequently, and then in the sense that they're not being televised. Occasionally, they're just completely off the record. I wonder if, Scaramucci brings in, more of a Laura Ingraham type, someone who, even like a Tony Snow, somebody who really relishes that sort of exposure, if in fact that will change these briefings, if in fact Trump will want these things to now be on air more often than not. So, you could see sort of like the Fox and Friendsification of the White House briefing room possibly taking place, because I do think that that's probably what Trump would prefer.
Yeah, absolutely. What else is going on in the world today?
Well, as you know, we're all taking a look at exactly what seems to be a kind of inevitable showdown between President Trump and Bob Mueller, the head of the special counsel, looking into the whole Russia story, as big or small as it may end up being. Trump is now looking into a number of questions. One is how can we try to discredit Bob Mueller if we can in fact end up firing him, which Trump could do, although I think that most people would probably say that was a politically terrible decision. But we're hearing the news this week has been that Bob, as if we're best friends, Mr. Mueller is now expanding his probe to look into things beyond Russia, including Trump's business dealings, taking a look at past tax filings, which I know you and I have talked about before. I think is Trump's biggest insecurity.
Yeah, either he's trying to hide the fact that he's been doing business with mobsters, whether they're American or Russian or both, or, and this has been my theory all along, he's trying to hide the fact that he's completely underwater and has been since his last bankruptcy. He's actually not a billionaire. He's actually hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. And I don't think he wants anybody to know that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And, and I don't claim to be enough of an expert on this stuff to know that just if Bob Mueller looks at the tax returns, if in fact that would make them public, I can't imagine that they would, unless, of course, saw something in there that was damning to the mission that he has. But Trump has always said that should this special counsel go beyond just the Russia scope, that he would try to squash it, which is what's happening. But the question is, is Bob Mueller sort of pulling a Ken Starr and drastically going on a fishing expedition, or is it because Trump's business dealings, his political dealings, his national security dealings are also interconnected with Russia, that to Trump what might seem like a fishing expedition in reality is really the same ballgame? Yeah, is there an actual fire here with all this smoke? Very interesting. And about 90 seconds left, Patrick. What else is up? Well, and lastly, we're all going to try to take a look at what is the future of the Republican effort to repeal and replace. Mitch McConnell saying he's not giving up, but the reality is that any efforts they have, I guess, just on repealing at this place is complicated by the sad news about John McCain, also complicated by the CBO scores that show 32 million people will be without health insurance. Mitch McConnell wants to see it happen. Donald Trump says he wants to see it happen. But, besides those two, it's very hard to see there being a path forward for any real meaningful repeal. I mean, meaningful depending on your point of view, but meaningful action on repealing Obamacare. And so more and more, I think Obamacare is becoming the law of the land. Yeah. So do you think that, Marco Rubio took a bite out of Obamacare, a big and fairly substantial one, by doing away with the risk corridors back a year and a half ago. And now Trump has threatened to not make the remaining payments, the subsidy payments to the insurance companies, which is causing them to freak out. Do you think that the administration is just going to have to embrace Obamacare and put it back, undo the damage that Marco Rubio and the other Republicans did? Or, what are they going to do? Well, that's the thing, is that Trump makes these threats, but the reality is that, Trump doesn't scare anybody, at least not anymore. So when he says, he barks at Capitol Hill to get things done, when he tells them to forget replacing, let's just repeal. In any other administration, these would be powerful words from at least meaningful bully pulpit. But, Trump's words increasingly become powerless, and people on Capitol Hill aren't really swayed by it. So, yeah, he threatened Dean Heller, who was sitting right next to him, and that might actually help Dean Heller. Who knows? Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News. Thank you, Patrick. You bet. Take care. Good talking with you. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
And welcome to Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, The Fate of the World and What We Can Do About It. And this is from page 165, The Lives of Ancient People. From the San and the Kogi, Value, Community, and Cooperation, we are part of the world, not separate from it. Chapter. One of the oldest cultures on Earth is that of the Kung Bushmen, it's an exclamation mark to make the noise, of the Kalahari Desert in the northern parts of South Africa. The exclamation point in their name, Kung, represents a sound in their language which we don't have in English. It's a popping noise made in the mouth by forming a vacuum between the tongue and the top of the mouth and then pulling the tongue down quickly. There are three other sounds in their language for which we have no letters, all of them clicks or pops, made by similarly clicking the tongue against the front of the mouth or the sides of the mouth and teeth. They're such a unique culture that although they're ancient, their language contains sounds that have traveled to no other human tongue on Earth. Over the past few decades, as they've become more well-known, they've asked anthropologists and linguists that they be called the San, although most texts from before the 1980s refer to them as the Kung. They and their life are portrayed wonderfully well in the film The Gods Must Be Crazy. The San are racially distinct from the other Africans who have conquered the continent in the past millennia. Their skin is more yellow than black, and their eyes are slightly slanted as if they share a common ancestor with Asians, or perhaps are indeed an early ancestor of the Asians. Their hair is black and curly like other Africans, but they're comparatively short and thin, often standing less than 5 feet tall and weighing fewer than 100 pounds. The lives of the San were first chronicled quite elegantly by Lawrence Vanderpost, a South African explorer and writer. In his 1961 book, The Heart of the Hunter, he tells of coming across a small Kung tribe of about a dozen adults and children as they crossed a particularly hot and barren part of the desert. Vanderpost and his fellow explorers started hunting some game so the Bushmen could have extra food to carry on their journey toward the lightning on the horizon, where the seasonal rains were beginning. The explorers spent an entire day hunting with their Land Rovers and provisioned the Bushmen well for their trip. As the little tribe was leaving, Vanderpost and his group stood to wave goodbye, but the Bushmen simply walked off with many smiles. No thank yous were ever given for all that food. One of Vanderpost's assistants, a hunter who'd never encountered Bushmen before, commented that they seemed ungrateful and uncaring. Ben, one of the other men in the group who understood Bushman culture, responded that to give another human food and water is only good manners and is routine behavior among the Bushmen. If the white men had been starving on a long trek and the Bushmen had found them, they would immediately share their food and water, even if it endangered their own survival, and they would not expect a thank you in response. In fact, in San Bushman culture, to eat in front of another person who is without food is considered an immoral act, every bit as horrific as if in our culture, a person were to walk out onto a busy city sidewalk, pull down their pants, and defecate. Everyone would be shocked and horrified. As it happens, the San do say thank you. They do it whenever they're hunting, when they're making a decision to take a life. No animal is killed for food by the San without being thanked by them, both at the time of the hunt and later when a dance is done for the soul of the animal. And animals are only killed when there is a clear need for food. For those of us who grew up in modern civilization, it's difficult to imagine a life and culture where such fundamental things are simply taken for granted. When we stop behind a car at a red light, we don't open the door and run up to the car in front of us to thank them for being so considerate as to follow the basic rules of the road and stop for the red light. It's simply a given that everybody does that. No thanks are required. Thanking people for doing something implies they had a choice to do otherwise and did so out of a desire to be nice. But imagine a world where feeding another person is as much an automatic response as stopping at a red light.
A world where a person who fails to feed or care for another is ostracized or punished, the way we give people tickets when they run red lights. Where the care of others is more important than even the care of yourself. Where the teaching all things that you should want others to do to you, do ye even so unto them, is actually practiced. Not out of an effort, but as part of a daily routine, as the normal way things are, as the basic assumption of a society. That is San culture, the way of an older culture. A story of Chippewa, a storyteller of Chippewa and Cree ancestry told me that his people have a belief that if a person visits your home and you fail to share with them food and water so that they leave hungry or thirsty, and then the Creator decides to take them home at that time, they will arrive in the spirit world hungry and thirsty. He said the responsibility for that person's condition in the world is yours because you were the last person he met and you had an opportunity to feed him. So we have an obligation to feed and give water and shelter and whatever else a person may need whenever they come into our village or our home. In our younger culture, we value productivity and individual possession. In their older culture, they value community. Most modern people find it difficult or impossible to imagine a world where community is more important than possessions. Yet this is how about 1% of the world's population still lives, and how all of your and my ancestors lived for hundreds of thousands of years. In 1997, a group of 13 researchers released a study in which they quantified the value of all the environments on the planet, from measuring the size of the Louisiana shrimp harvest to how much people were willing to pay for access to a lake, coral reef, or other natural attraction. They concluded that the planet's natural areas were worth about $33 trillion. And then from there, I go on to talk about how that's a crazy way to value anything. And we need to be, revisiting these ancient culture values. The book is The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And there's a few things in the news that I wanted to share with you, which I find interesting. In Poland, this is, Donald Trump went to Poland. And you say, well, why Poland, right? Why didn't he go to the UK or Spain or France or, Poland? Like, it's not to put down Poland, but it hasn't traditionally been, part of Western Europe and one of our major allies and, all that kind of stuff. Well, Poland is going hard to the right. And the people of Poland are not, some of them are not taking it. And so this story from I believe this is from the Financial Times, tens of thousands of Poles took to the streets on Thursday night to protest against the passing of a Supreme Court bill that critics fear will undermine the independence of Poland's judiciary. According to Warsaw City Hall, 50,000 people took part in a demonstration outside the presidential palace in the city. The police said it was only 14,000. Oh, they have that same problem we do. Thousands more rallied in other big cities across Poland in the largest show of public opposition since the Supreme Court bill was published last Wednesday. Chanting united opposition and here is Poland, the crowds in Warsaw called on President Andrzej Duda to veto the bill, as well as two others passed last week that will give politicians wide-ranging powers over Poland's court system. So this is happening in Poland. It's also happening in Venezuela right now. Tens of thousands of people in the street, this is something to pay attention to, right? Watch this space, because what we're seeing, and we're seeing it in country after country around the world, is hardcore right-wing oligarchs, billionaires, funding political movements that will solidify the power of billionaires and reduce the power of governments, using slogans like smaller government, lean, efficient, privatize, all this kind of stuff, when really what it's all about is that the only power that is strong enough to push back against a billionaire is the power of a government. which is why the billionaires sponsor politicians like Ronnie Reagan who say things like, you know, government is not the solution to your problems. Government is the problem. Well, government is the problem if you're a billionaire and you make your money polluting the world, right? I mean, it's really simple. Then, yeah, government's a problem. But, you know, government is generally pretty useful. We all like having streets and, you know, that actually work, you know, that don't have potholes and things, and infrastructure that works, and street lights and public schools. And we'd like to have a national health care system. Thank you very much. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff that could be going on in all of these countries. And to me, this is the most alarming event happening in the world right now, is the right-wingification of the rest of the planet. It's happening here in the United States. We're watching it right in front of us. We've been watching it for 35 years since the election of Ronald Reagan, but it's also happening in other countries. And it's the exact, it's the people who get together at Davos. Well, not just them. I mean, this is the billionaire crowd. We're talking about in the United States, they're not all billionaires. Many of them are simply multimillionaires, but you're talking about 115,000 people in the United States in the top 1/100th of 1%. And you're talking about, you know, a few tens of thousands or a few 100,000 people in the rest of the world that are funding these movements and that are running these autocracies. This is scary stuff. And by the way, it has actual real world consequences. Timothy Lee wrote a fascinating piece for Vox back last Tuesday. It's titled, "Is Ronald Reagan to blame for the decline of St. Louis? Some experts think so." And just follow this. This is just like an example of how these things, you know, so they go in and they damage things, and then they stand around going, hey, look at it's damaged. Oh, hey, let's get some billionaires to fix this. Anyhow, this is what Timothy Lee wrote for Vox. "The growing economic gap between prosperous coastal cities and struggling cities in middle America is often blamed on impersonal forces like globalization and technological progress. But some thinkers have started pointing to another culprit: little-noticed shifts in antitrust enforcement beginning in the 1980s that allowed a string of mega mergers." So this is the argument, right? This is back in the 80s, the Reagan administration said, you know, we don't really need to enforce the Sherman Antitrust Act anymore. You know, Richard Nixon started breaking up AT&T in 1972. Jimmy Carter finished that process in 1978. And, you know, it actually was good for the stockholders of AT&T stock and spurred all kinds of innovation once they broke up AT&T. It was a great thing, a great successful effort. But, you know, we did that. So let's not do that anymore. So when Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act, what happened was all these companies just started gobbling each other up. And an American landscape that was filled, I mean, the majority of business being done in the United States when Reagan came into office was being done in small and local businesses at the local level all across the country. And, you know, we had a few chains, you know, McDonald's and things like that, Holiday Inn. But by and large, most chains were statewide. But when Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Act, well, as a result, back to the Vox article, as a result, we got a lot more mergers, resulting in massive conglomerates that are disproportionately headquartered in a handful of big cities. The result, the few big cities have gained so many jobs that it's producing a housing crisis. And you can see that in San Francisco right now. You know, you can't even rent a house in San Francisco or an apartment for, you know, any kind of reasonable price. Forget buying something. So you got this housing crisis. Meanwhile, a lot of mid-sized cities like St. Louis, Cleveland, Pittsburgh have suffered from anemic economic growth. Why? Well, they point out virtually all of these cities. In fact, this is Mark Murrow, an expert on urban policy at Brookings. He says virtually all cities and metropolitan areas have seen precipitous declines in the number of locally owned corporations. This has seriously degraded the quality and local focus of regional business leadership, philanthropy, and other resources. And then they go on to add that simmering public anger at coastal elites has was a major force in American politics in 2016. Elizabeth Warren was on that, as was Donald Trump. You know, Trump was talking about these banksters, they're killers. Now Trump was just being rhetorical. He doesn't want to break them up. But Basically, aggressive enforcement of antitrust law, he writes, naturally acted as a brake on the concentration of economic power. St. Louis, for example. Why is St. Louis not doing well right now? When Reagan came into office, they had 23 Fortune 500 companies in St. Louis. Today, there's 9. What happened to the rest of them? They got bought out. In the 1990s, Tim writes in Vox, in the 1990s, St. Louis served as a hub for TWA, but TWA was acquired by American Airlines, which decided after 2001 it didn't make sense to continue treating the city as one of its hubs. Number of daily flights out of Lambert St. Louis Airport fell. Then employment at Anheuser-Busch fell from 6,000 before the 2008 merger to 4,000 in 2011. Boeing laid off 7,000 people in St. Louis after it acquired McDonnell Douglas in 1997. At a certain point, this becomes a vicious cycle. The shortage of top-tier ad agencies and law firms, because they're no longer there because there's not big companies there, makes it harder to attract new corporate headquarters. The lack of major employers makes it harder to convince talented young workers to stay, which in turn makes it harder for local businesses to grow. So Ronald Reagan stopping the enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1982, something that a trend which has not reversed itself to this day, by the way, under either Democratic or Republican presidents, is, and I think Timothy Lee is absolutely right over at Vox, is responsible for much of the destruction of middle America. Ronald Reagan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls after this. Also, we got a couple of guests who are going to drop by from the American Federation for Teachers radio row. And welcome back, Kurt in Los Angeles. Hey, Kurt, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm fine.
Good. Hey, well, I want to go way off topic since this is Anything Goes Friday or summer. What I want to ask you about is, do you know much about GMOs?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the technology and the political as well as the scientific debates. Sure.
Okay. Well, maybe I've got it wrong, but to me, GMO to me means cloned foods, because from what I understand, companies such as big agribusinesses such as Monsanto are doing some kind of splicing of DNA genes or something to make fruits and vegetables grow faster or something. I don't know, because I read something on it and it said something about there's actually some type of varying results that they get, and they don't really understand what they're doing, except they're just fooling around with our food. And
yeah.
I bring this up because for the past 10 years, I've noticed that my bananas don't taste like the same banana I used to eat as a kid. The apples that I bite into don't taste like the same apple that I used to get as a kid. There's no flavor.
Yep.
I buy grapes, and it tastes like I'm eating like a bulb full of water. There's no flavor. It's just bland. Everything is bland. But then if I go buy something called organic foods, if I go and I want to spend $2 a pound on something at a Trader Joe's, oh, the flavor's there.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, wait a minute though. Why should I have to go buy something that's organic at $5 a pound in order to get the essential fruits and vegetables that I need to live?
Right.
You know, and what I don't understand is how our Food and Drug Administration, why are they allowing these garbage
right. The answer, Kurt, is that first of all, they're allowing it because their criteria is it good for the food supply? Is it good for human consumption? Is it good for the planet? Their criteria is it dangerous? And they're asserting, and the GMO companies are asserting, that their products are not dangerous. I think that there's some evidence to the contrary. They're not clones. Clones are where you take one cell or one animal or whatever it may be, and without sexual reproduction, you create an identical clone of it, you know. But these plants are actually, you know, sexually reproducing. You know, you've got pollen and pistils and all that kind of stuff. So what they're doing is, you're absolutely right. They are splicing the genes, and the problem with the taste is they're genetically modifying bananas and tomatoes and lots of potatoes, lots of these foods in ways that allow them to be picked earlier and to last longer in the transport cycle so that they can ship them all over the world. And so they ripen more slowly, and they don't go bad while they're being shipped and things. And so they're selectively gene editing for durability rather than for flavor. And that's why the heirloom products, the heirloom tomatoes, the heirloom apples taste so much better. That's number one. And then number two, they're also putting in genes that give them resistance to things like Roundup, glyphosate, the chemical from Monsanto, and so you can spray even more of that stuff on the crops, and then of course that means that there's more of that stuff ending up in our food supply, which is, in my opinion, not good for us. So that's what it is, Kurt. Kurt, thanks a lot for the call. It's a great topic. Hey, Tom.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Welcome back. And on the line with us is Christine Pellegrino, New York State Assemblywoman representing the 9th District of New York, elementary school teacher, Bernie Kratt, and an attendee at the American Federation of Teachers Conference and Radio Row. You can tweet Christine at cpellegrino1221. Assemblywoman Pellegrino, welcome to the program.
Hi, Tom.
Thanks for joining us. So what's going on at the AFT, and what are you up to these days?
Wow. Well, so it's amazing to be here with all these incredible teachers, unionists, activists, education advocates. There's great conversations about teaching and learning, about what teachers can do to run for office. And that's what I was here primarily to advocate for more teachers to get involved. Ultimately helping to craft policy at every level, local, state, and hopefully at the federal level as well.
Yeah. So, by the way, what is the status of the New York State Assembly? I've never lived in New York State, so I just kind of watch it from afar. But right. I'm reading these strange stories about Democrats behaving like Republicans. I don't remember if it's the Senate or it's the Assembly. What's going on?
It's a little strange. The Assembly is a really great place to be. We have a great group of colleagues dedicated to moving progressive policy forward in New York. And unfortunately, in the Senate, we have a group of about 8 breakaway Democrats that are part of this caucus. They call themselves the IDC, the Independent Democratic Caucus, and it definitely gets in the way of passing legislation like healthcare for all, and even the Child Victims Act, which would protect children from sexual predators. And the budget ultimately supporting public education and fully funding our schools gets held up in the Senate, not necessarily by the Republicans, but by this group of breakaway Democrats. So, our hope is that the governor will do more to call these Democrats back into the Democratic caucus and to help us in the Assembly to pass the most progressive legislation, packages of legislation, that includes supporting, like I said, fully funding public education. We don't really want any more of our money being sent to New York City charter schools. From the district where I live in Long Island, they're fully supportive of public education, and that's we want our fair share, and that's one of the prongs of my platform.
How is this playing out at the state level? This battle between the private charter schools, the for-profit education industry, as it were, versus public education.
Yeah, so privatization is one of the we're finding this in lots of sectors, right? Private prisons are very much operating the same way as charter schools, where they are funded by sometimes very large corporations, hedge funds come in. This is like an investment scheme strategy on their part. Has very little to do with education. Ultimately, targeting areas, communities of color, and it goes hand in hand with standardization and the standards that have come out that are fully opposed by people in New York and across the country. The Common Core was rejected by teachers and community members, and we see it as the mechanism to remove local control from our teachers and our schools and our school districts and ultimately the state. And that's one of the reasons why I got involved in politics in general, was to have a voice and to advocate for our kids, for my kids,
right,
for all kids.
How do we push back when you've got billionaires, like Gates, for example, who are generally fairly well regarded, doing great work, vaccinating kids in Africa, stuff like that, and then they come along with this, what was that Superman movie or whatever it is, Waiting for
Superman.
Yeah, and start promoting these bizarre ideas. How do we push back?
Yeah, well, I think pushback comes when more educators and more education advocates get involved, and they speak out. I mean, we've seen the opt-out movement particularly on Long Island, fighting back against this regime and the education. Yeah, opting.
What does that mean?
Yeah, in New York, kids are subjected to high-stakes tests that are supposed to measure their acumen on these standards. They're highly developmentally inappropriate, and ultimately they're used to create this narrative. And one of the things that we did was we embraced and we used this mechanism of refusal. So when the tests were written, some kids who would naturally refuse to take the test are in a way.
So that's the opt-out thing, is opting out of the test.
It gives parents the ability to refuse to allow their kids to take this and engage in this.
That's great. Christine, we're out of time, but our Assemblywoman, thank you so much for being with us.
You bet.
Great talking with you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And you can tweet Assemblywoman Pellegrino at cpellegrino1221. We'll be right back. The Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading from Walking Your Blues Away, How to Heal the Mind and Create Emotional Well-Being, from Chapter 1, How Trauma Sticks and the Mechanism of PTSD. One of the enduring mysteries in the field of psychology is why the same event produces such different memories and responses in different people. As the New York Times reported in a July 1st, 2004 article, 1 out of every 6 soldiers coming home from the war in Iraq is showing signs of emotional difficulties, particularly post-traumatic stress disorder. Citing a report in the New England Journal of Medicine, the writer noted The researchers surveyed more than 6,000 soldiers in the month before and after service in Iraq and Afghanistan. Almost 17% of those who fought in Iraq reported symptoms of major depression, severe anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder, compared with 11% of the troops who served in Afghanistan. In World War II, post-war depression and anxiety was called battle fatigue. In World War I, we called it shell shock. The question isn't so much why it happens. We know GIs in war do and see horrific things. The question that perplexes us is why post-war anxiety and depression haunts some veterans and not others. Of course, some vets see harder combat than others, but even that doesn't account for the statistics. There are still huge variations among individual soldiers in how they respond to the same event. The same is true in the civilian world. Some people develop PTSD and others don't, facing the exact same circumstances. In order to understand why some people are still shocked months and even years after a traumatic event, it's necessary to first understand how the brain and mind processes trauma. The brain is a complex collection of deeply interconnected parts and processes. I'm vastly oversimplifying here for the purpose of description. In light of those caveats, here's a possible scenario that's not inconsistent with much of what's known about brain function. There's a part of the limbic brain, or visceral brain, called the hippocampus that's believed to function as a one-day scratch pad for memory. Everything you experience throughout the day is stored in the hippocampus. In order for the impressions of the experience to become a long-term memory, they must pass through the hippocampus into the rest of the brain. People with a damaged hippocampus remember past events but have extreme difficulty learning new things. Although the rest of the brain is able to integrate recent information from the hippocampus in relation to stored memories, in order to understand that one thing happened a week ago and another thing happened a month ago, the hippocampus knows only one time, today. During the night as we sleep, the hippocampus dumps its information from the day into the rest of the brain for processing, sorting, storing, and disposing of irrelevant information. As the brain is processing the details of the day from the hippocampus, we experience what we call dreaming. Many sleep researchers are convinced that when we experience REM sleep, most of the events, including the traumas of our daily life, are processed. The processing of information management completed. When we wake up in the morning, the hippocampus is once again empty and ready to record another day. The problem emerges when the hippocampus is carrying information that's too much or too hot for the larger brain/mind to handle. When a recent memory is too strong to be easily and unremarkably processed, it presents in our dream world as a nightmare. If that still doesn't download the information from the hippocampus, then the trauma either becomes buried in the subconscious, a process Freud referred to as repression, or it gets thrown back into the hippocampus the next morning. It's as if the brain says, whoa, that's too much for me to process in one evening. Please hang on to it for another day. When the person wakes up in the morning, the information's still there in the hippocampus, still remembered and known and felt as if it happened that same very day. The conjecture that the hippocampus knows little about the more distant past accounts for the unique feature of true PTSD, that the person feels every day as if the past event happened today, or at least in the very recent past. The trauma is always front, center, new, fresh, and raw. The consequences can be psychologically and emotionally devastating. Every day is affected by a past event. The traumatic event never passes from now until then, and is never processed and filed away in the memory banks, where it loses the power to cause pain and problems on a daily basis. The impact of this on the mind and the emotions is staggering. Brain scans even demonstrate that before a PTSD event has been processed, the amygdala, a part of the brain responsible for strong emotional states, such as those involved with survival or the perception of a threat to survival, and the hippocampus are not functioning normally. The brain scan makes it possible to, in a way, see the effect of the stuck memory. After processing the memory, these parts of the brain usually return to normal functioning. One of the key concepts of many schools of psychology is that human beings are most functional when every part of the mind has access to all other parts. In particular, this functionality is a matter of having full access to positive resources, such as memories of times when we were successful in our undertakings and the good feelings we associate with those accomplishments. Working from this level of functionality, then, when we take on a new task, for example, we first remember times in the past when we attempted something similar and accomplished our goals. This functionality can be accessed in all endeavors, from embarking on a new love relationship to making your first public speaking engagement. Memories of past accomplishments and capabilities are stored in parts of the brain far from the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala and hippocampus, part of our brain's most primary and primitive structures, lie deep in the brain. Thus, having a negative memory stuck deep in the hippocampus blocks the pain and fear associated with that memory
from reaching and associating with positive memories and resource states, which are housed in more distant parts of the brain. So in other words, if we don't get these traumatic memories out of the hippocampus, then everything coming in gets filtered through that and blocked having access to resource states that can help and heal us. So the rest of the book is how to get that stuff out of the hippocampus. The book is Walking Your Blues Away.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And John in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I really liked what Randy Weingartner had to say on your program, and then also I had listened to her yesterday on the Jeff Santos Our Revolution radio, and he interviewed her today extensively, and I think that she really gets it because she's, you know, when you talk about the helping professions, whether it's healthcare like Roseanne DeMauro or like Randy Weingartner with the, you know, with education, you know, you have to look at the underlying causes of the dysfunction of our entire society because you're dealing with that every day. And so, you know, she really seeks a solidarity with all progressives, with everyone, you know, and particularly people that are going to, you know, really change, you know, the dynamic because teachers are really in a hard place, and so are healthcare professionals. But I would say that I think my sister is a teacher. Some of the things that she said. And also some of the things from it was a person who represented the Albuquerque AFT. I think her last name was Bernstein, but I might be wrong about that. Was absolutely right. She was a early childhood teacher, and my sister has a lot of the, you know, absolutely was right on. I'm going to have her listen to Our Revolution so that she can listen just to that particular critique. But you know, we need to have solidarity. It's so important. It's beyond, you know, just struggles of individual unions. It's about racism. It's about class. It's about all these different groups that are disenfranchised. It's the whole thing. What you critique every day is really, those are union issues. Those are bottom line issues for all progressives, and we need to support each other. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, you said it very well, John. Thank you very much. I totally agree. Thank you. Jim in Chicago. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind?
Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Hi, Jim.
Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I have been listening to Thom Hartmann.
Yeah, you're on the air right now. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I just thinking, I have listened so much, and Thom Hartmann is the best talk show that can provide the answer to the public in a way that we have so much of financial situation that I have one short question.
Please.
As Illinois is bankruptcy right now, Chicago is collapsing. My question is, should the U.S. file bankruptcy? Because we did back in 1933, and according to the federal law, we can file bankruptcy every 80 years. So I just thought, I listen to your program all the time in a way that we're in an uncertainty time and to buy gold and all that, but it's not clear. I just feel like...
Yeah. Jim, just FYI, I'm not sure where you're getting your information, but the United States has never declared bankruptcy. We have never repudiated our debt. There was a period of a few years during the Andrew Jackson administration when our debt was paid down to zero. That produced a Great Depression that was the worst, longest, and deepest depression in the history of the United States, because there was, you know, there was no place for people to, a safe place for people to park money, because we were no longer selling Treasury bills. The national debt is a good thing, actually, because it is private savings. The federal debt is a place where people can safely park money. And the reason why there's virtually an industry, and has been for decades, freaking out about the national debt and the debt ceiling and quack, quack, blah, 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 on all this stuff. The reason for that is that the banksters, and Pete Peterson is the guy who's been heading this, who's a Wall Street billionaire, is that the banksters from Wall Street are looking and they're going, hey, there's $17 trillion in federal debt, and you take out the money where the government owes itself, and it's maybe $15 trillion. $15 trillion in federal debt. That money, which the federal government is paying, interest on, that money could be in our bank instead of the U.S. Treasury. We should be the ones where people park their money. So, it's like when George W. Bush was born, his parents put $1 million into Treasury bills, to fund his endowment or his, whatever his, and frankly, I don't know the exact amount, but this is how trust fund babies are born, right? Or are funded. And typically it's with treasuries because they're safe. They're a super safe investment. And so what Wall Street is saying is, no, we want them to instead be born with certificates of deposit at Citibank or Wells Fargo or whatever it may be, name the bank. And that's why they're all flipped out. But the national debt represents no threat to the United States whatsoever. And like I said, it's a place for private savings. And should the federal government ever decide that it wants to pay down the national debt, it can simply issue coinage to do so. The Constitution gives the federal government the authority to issue coinage. The Fed does not issue coins. So if you have physical coins in your pocket, those are actually currency produced by the federal government. If you have paper money, that's not currency produced by the federal government. That's Federal Reserve notes. That's money produced by the Fed. The Fed produces money through banks lending money. But the federal government could, in theory, and there's been no shortage of books on this topic, could literally issue 10 $1 trillion coins, bringing into being $10 trillion, and then hand those coins with a value of $1 trillion, which was just created by the Treasury, platinum coin or something, then hand those over to the Treasury itself. The Treasury can give them to itself and pay off the debt. The problem is that, you do that and people don't have a place to put their money. So, so you'd just be throwing profits back to the banksters. That's the deal, Jim. Jim, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's always a great topic to talk about. Curtis in Richmond, Virginia. Hey, Curtis, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you today?
Great. What's up?
Listen, Tom, I'm starting to compare the people of Palestine more and more to the black people of the United States that are being genocided from these race soldier police that are shooting us down in our streets and in our homes. And I was looking in the Huffington Post the other day, and I saw that 45 senators are trying to vote in a bill to boycott Israel. To an anti-boycott bill on Israel.
Yeah, to make it a crime to call for a boycott or divestment of Israel. Yes.
Right. And from anywhere from $250,000 to $1 million or $20, or 20 years imprisonment.
That's right.
And I'd like to know your thoughts about that.
I think it's outrageous, Curtis, and
absolutely outrageous, Tom.
Yeah, and you look at the list of sponsors and co-sponsors, and there's some good Democrats in there. I think that this thing just got slipped. It's one of those, hey, here's a pro-Israel bill. Okay, fine, put my name on it. And people had no idea that it was like, 20 years in prison for literally speaking out in public, saying that you disagree with Israeli policy, and therefore that you think that that there should be a boycott, or you personally want to boycott Israel or whatever. It is an obscene law if I'm properly characterizing it. And I'm getting this not from having read the law, but from having read several articles about it. We had a conversation, both Congressman Keith Ellison and also Congressman Mark Pocan on this program in previous hours today, called out this law and said, there's something wrong here. We need to figure out what's going on and how did this get where it is. So I share your concern, Curtis, and and not only that, I think if that law was put into effect, it would probably last about one day before somebody took it to the Supreme Court as a violation of the First Amendment. So I'm with you, Curtis. Thank you for the call. Fran in Seattle. Hey, Fran, what's up?
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. What's on your mind?
Through. I wonder, can you confirm or deny something I got an email about? I heard that the California State Legislature and the New York Assembly were both working on trying to pass single-payer health care at the state level.
That's true.
I hadn't heard anything about it anywhere else.
Yeah.
So
The California bill has passed the Senate, I believe, or will, and is in the state assembly. And the leader of the state assembly, the equivalent of kind of Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, the Speaker of the Assembly, is a Democrat. And Rendon, I believe his name is. And he is holding this thing up. He's not allowing a vote on it. And there's a lot of different speculations as to why he's doing this, whether he's being lobbied to do it or whether he thinks it's a bad bill and he wants to make it better or what. And I am not so knowledgeable about California politics, frankly, that I can weigh in with an informed opinion on that. In New York State, the state assembly and the state Senate both have looked at this. It's less likely it'll get through the state Senate in New York because of these 8 Democrats who are pretending that they're Republicans and not going along with these things. And also, I'm not sure in New York it has the support of the governor. And frankly, I don't know if Jerry Brown in California supports it. So, but you know, all of this is still good news because, you know, 5-10 years ago, nobody was even discussing this. It wasn't even considered in the realm of possibility or probability. And now it is. And that's a good thing. So, Fran, thanks a lot for the call. And thanks for listening to Sirius XM. We will be back in just a minute. By the way, Denise Specht may be with us, an elementary school teacher and president of Education Minnesota. So assuming that she calls in, she's at the Radio Row there at the American Federation of Teachers. Plus, we'll be taking your calls. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Ann in Redondo Beach, California. Hey, Ann, thanks for calling. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm glad to be with you. I'm calling about climate change. The cap-and-trade bill that was passed this past week in California. Jerry Brown's been really busy with this, and it's one of those cases of when you reach a consensus, no one is happy. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what we have. You know, some of your callers were wanting, you know, a carbon tax, which is certainly what I would like, but you have to look at what is actually viable. And so Brown did an amazing job of dealing with the various business interests and agriculture. It's just huge in this state. And they've managed to pull it off. And what I think really polished it off is he got together with the legislators, walked in on one of their meetings, and basically said, you know, climate change is real. It needs to be addressed. This is not for me. I'm going to be dead. It's for you. And so it's a very, very complex thing. But I'm happy because essentially we're moving the ball forward in trying to address greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, that's a good thing. It's a good thing. And cap and trade works, by the way. You know, and this is the thing that Republicans seem to have completely forgotten, was that back in the late 1980s, when George Herbert Walker Bush was president, we had a serious problem, a worldwide problem, but, you know, in particular for American cities, with acid rain. And the acid rain was because of high sulfur emissions, sulfur dioxide, which became high sulfur emissions principally coming out of coal-fired power plants and diesel engines, but also out of you know, automobiles. And so they put into place a cap-and-trade program where the industry that was producing all this sulfur that was going into the atmosphere was, you know, there was a price put on that sulfur, and they could buy and sell. And over time, the amount of sulfur that they could do declined, and they successfully ended the acid rain epidemic or problem or crisis or whatever you want to call it. And we could do the same thing with CO2. You know, whether it's a carbon tax or whether it's cap and trade. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So California has had a cap and trade program in place, but it expires in 2020, and that's why this renewal took place. So the current one continues through 2020, and then it will be taken over by the new one. This is really a complex thing. There were actually 3 bills, and we're going to end up voting on a proposition in 2018 to codify one of the deals that was made in getting this thing done. What's interesting is generating revenue, and now all the bickerings about what are we going to do with the revenue, although the bills do outline the basic tenets of it. There's been a couple of really good articles in the LA Times yesterday. George Skelton, and he talks about the process, and then there's another article called The Explainer that talks the more details about it. And, you know, I can sit there and understand it, but actually parroting out all the different aspects of this bill is difficult. It's really a complex thing. But we will know over the next decade on how this will work out. Yeah. Currently, California is almost at the 1990 levels of CO2 emissions.
That's remarkable, given how much population has grown since. And I gotta run, but thank you for the call, and thanks for raising a really, really important issue. I appreciate it. We will be right back. Hey, thanks so much to our show director, Louise Hartmann, to my executive producer, Sean Taylor, to our video director, Chris Mendelis, to our radio and TV producer, Troy Miller, to our phone screener, Nate Atwell, to our writer-researcher, Nate Sweet, to our webmasters, Nigel Peacock and Jamie Holly, our business manager, Ron Hartenbaum, everyone at the various groups that syndicate our program, Digital Media, Pacifica Radio, SiriusXM Satellite Radio, Cable Radio Network, and Free Speech TV on Dish Network, DirecTV, all the cable providers who carry our program, including Manhattan Neighborhood Network and all the others around the country. The great folks at Free Speech TV and our TTV who work on the big picture, to the Progressive Voices channel on TuneIn, to Netroots Radio, to our newsletter editor, Sue Nethercutt, to the folks in our chat room, to Ellen Ratner, Victoria Jones, Bob Ney, and everyone at Talk Media News, to Jay Goodman-Tamboli for tech support, to our affiliates, our sponsors, and to you for supporting our program. Thank you so much. Bill in Linwood, Massachusetts. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Linwood, Washington.
Washington. I'm sorry. You're right.
Hey.
I used to live just down the road from Lynn, Massachusetts. It just stuck in my head.
I'm wondering if the Democratic senators can't just draw straws and the people with the 3 or 4 short straws go ahead and vote for Mitch McConnell's Senate plan for health care, with the caveat that then we're not obstructionists. And the caveat that after 3.5 years, if people are better off, then we go ahead with the AHCA. If they're not better off, we go back to the ACA.
Yeah. Number one, I think there's something noble about being an obstructionist when you're trying to obstruct evil. And this Republican plan is going to turn $800 billion over to the billionaires, and it's going to throw 33 million people off their health insurance. That's evil in my mind. And so I support the Democrats who are opposing this. I would be outraged if any Democratic senator said, sure, I'll go along with the Republicans. I understand what you're trying to say, Bill. Let's have a demonstration here, essentially, of what works and what doesn't. We've already done that. We've been doing that for 100 years in the United States, and the rest of the world has as well. And what we see is that every country in the world that has a single-payer healthcare system is spending less than half of what we're spending, and people live longer. We're number 72 in the world in terms of life expectancy. And I mean, that's not a good thing. We're supposed to be, the best healthcare system in the world. No. We're in the 30s in terms of infant mortality. It's not the way to go. We really need to do single payer. But Bill, I understand your sentiment, and I laud it. The idea of let's prove what works and what doesn't, and let's work together and try to understand these things. It's very high-minded, but these Republicans are not high-minded. They're just shills for the billionaires. Bill, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Marie in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Marie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Listen, you had a caller way back that said we were being corporate rated, and that made sense to me. When they do the privatizing, I think why they're doing it is it's profitizing for the 2%.
Oh, absolutely. And it's been done with our prisons, it's been done with our schools, and it's been done with our military.
That's right. And not only that, but nobody has ever said how much each congressman is going to make, because they make $170,000 just in salary alone. So they're probably up to the $250,000 mark, which makes them the 2%, which means they're going to profitize from this.
Well, there are members of Congress who are fairly aggressive in trading stocks. Tom Price famously was one of them.
That's the one I was going to mention.
Yeah.
And Ryan.
Uh-huh.
And Ryan and McConnell and Pierce in New Mexico, who owns an oil field.
Yeah.
And is a Koch brother. So, and just to say the other caller that wants us to be obstructionists, Republicans have obstructed us since day one with Obama.
Yep.
So they're the ones that are perfecting that. So why don't they do that now and just let us have some time to see if Obamacare works without them obstructing us every step of the way and sabotaging the ACA.
Amen. Turnabout is fair play. Marie, thank you. Very, very well said. Appreciate the call. Eldon in Fort Stockton, Texas. Hey, Eldon, what's on your mind today?
Well, I believe in a single-payer health plan. And you look at our government, they could cut the military budget, they could cut the Pentagon budget, they could cut all the dadgum aides that all the senators and representatives have. And here's a big one. They could actually cut their salaries. That's ludicrous. Somebody making $175,000 a year, give or take, and only working part of the year. And by getting rid of some of the dadgum aides, they would actually have to sit down and do some work.
Yeah. Eldon, I don't think that congressional pay is a problem or an issue. And in fact, to the opposite of the point that you're making, respectfully, one of the reasons why you have so many multimillionaires now running for office is it's so expensive to run for office. And it's really you've got a bunch of Congress people here living in their offices in Washington, D.C., because rent's obscene in this town, and you've got to have a home in your home district, plus you've got to have a home in Washington, D.C., and that gets very expensive. And this is not to say, oh, poor members of Congress, 170 grand isn't enough. But I think cutting it would be a huge mistake. If anything, what we need is public financing of elections. We need to get the billionaire money out of our elections. That's where we need to go, in my opinion. Am I making sense, Eldon?
I'm sorry?
Am I making sense?
Yes, sir. And like I say, that's what I was getting to at the end of it. And, and one other thing, I'll let you go. Instead of importing all of our oil, why can't we make friends with Mexico for a change?
Yeah.
And make it where we can drill down there?
Well, we're actually we're a major oil exporter now. We were, although we're still importing oil. But they changed the law last year to make it legal to export oil, and they're doing it. The refiners are making big money. Eldon, thanks for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. Thank you all for being with us this week. Have a wonderful, safe weekend. Take good care of yourself and your families, and don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us to get involved. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. See you next Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.